Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Orazio. I'm the principal of St. Francis School. I take this opportunity to welcome all of our community members, staff members, parents, guardians, and take this opportunity to really extend to you how appreciative I am as we begin this journey towards exploring the idea of anxiety and the mental health. If you have children, and it doesn't look like anybody, I know you guys are hanging a little bit, we do have our world famous babysitting service. If you want to do the train into the library, go ahead. That's a great time. Before I do the formal part of the introductions tonight, I'd like to begin with our prayer. And I want to share with you something that our students do, which is really caught on in our schools. And hopefully you can partake in this. And it begins with a sign of our faith, and it's called the Christian meditation. So we just meditate. I think in our kindergartens we have up to how many minutes now? What was the record?
We're starting fresh,
but
so
we had a record last year.
Right now.
We're at 1.
3 minutes last year.
Of complete silence and reflection and being in the presence of God. And it's absolutely just a phenomenal, phenomenal way to pray. And if our kids can do it, I know we can. So please join me. You're welcome to sit nice and still and enjoy the heat. And just, you're welcome to close your eyes. Don't be offended if I close mine. And we'll begin with the sign of our faith, and we'll just reflect. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. What a way to begin. Isn't that nice? I would like to formally welcome this evening a few people that are in our audience. I'd like to begin with Trustee Luciani, who's just at the back. We have Diane Levchuk, who is here. Diane is our mental health lead with Brant Hulbert Norfolk Catholic District School Board, as well as Janet Ferris, who's child and youth worker with our school board. So I'd like to introduce them. And I want to also point out that this topic is so befitting to not just our youth, but to our adults. And we find ourselves supporting our community more and more in this aspect, and I'm certainly very appreciative of Dr. Templeman, who I will introduce in a few minutes. But you will get a bottle of water coming right up, and you will get one of these handouts if you haven't already. And I'm going to draw your attention. You don't have to turn to this page now, but Doctor, you've got you've got some really good examples. He's got the nervous, someone waiting for a needle, it looks like, and there's a spider. Could that spider be there? And then he's got, the messy desk, and how's that going to look? But he doesn't have the principal in here. Would you like a copy of a nervous principal? Oh, it's in there. Where is it? I've been proven wrong many times. Right there. I wish I had that much hair.
You do.
I do. It makes me feel, thank you. So at this point, I won't take up too much more of your time. I'd like to introduce Lisa Buis, who is a social worker, and she's going to formally take over now and introduce Dr. Templeman. But in advance, thank you both for being here this evening on behalf of our school community.
great. I didn't know how many we were going to expect. Normally we ask people to register for these workshops, and but Orazio did it a different way this time, so we weren't really sure how many people were going to come. So this is really great. Welcome. So my name is Lisa Buis, and I'm a social worker in Norfolk County. So I've been with the Grand Erie District School Board, that's their school social worker, one of their school social workers for 14 years. And I'm currently on leave from Grand Erie, and in private practice I do cognitive behavioral therapy for people who have anxiety or depression. I do that in Simple. It's great to have you guys here with Dr. David Templeman, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and his practice is in London. He also has a satellite practice in Brantford, where he sees children and adolescents via video conference every Friday through St. Leonard's Community Services. Big thanks to Orazio. I don't know how to say your last name.
Well, where are my students? They're pretty good at, they've got it down, including some Celta-Jerome.
They don't graduate until they get there. Anyway, big thanks to Orazio and St. Francis staff for hosting us tonight. In terms of mental health issues, school social workers, and I know you guys have some as well in the Catholic Board, are charged with addressing mental health issues of students when their learning is being impacted. So that's kind of a big job. And the reason the job is so daunting is because every school social worker is assigned multiple schools across a huge geographical area. And probably your child and youth workers are as well, I imagine. And so for example, the least amount of schools I ever had as a school social worker in 1 year was 13, and the most I had was 22 schools. So you can imagine that's an impossible job. You can't do a good job. And so workshops like this are a perfect opportunity for schools to partner with their parents and community members on addressing one of the biggest issues that we face in schools, teachers know, right, is anxiety, one of the biggest issues. In the school system, anxiety, if you ask any teacher, what does anxiety look like? They would tell you it depends on the age and stage of development of children. So in the primary and junior levels, which is JK, SK, all the way up to and including grade 6, anxiety is easier to see, right? It's more overt. So you might see a kid hanging on to mom's leg, crying, don't leave me here, I just want to stay home with you, why can't you be my teacher? That kind of idea, you probably lived through that. We also see lots of tears, we see kids then starting to say, I don't feel well. So they get lots of trips to the office where they have to go home or they have to call home because they have tummy aches and that kind of idea. But we can usually get them into the buildings. We can get them into school because as parents we're bigger and we go, you're going to be fine, it's okay. We kind of hand you off to the school staff, and we really hope as parents that our children are going to grow out of it. And some do. A lot don't. In the intermediate and secondary levels in schools, it starts to look different. It's harder to spot anxiety in students. And that's because it kind of goes underground. And usually kids at these ages, so that's grade 7 and 8, and then all the way through to high school, at these ages, kids actually start deciding with their feet how they're going to manage anxiety, and they often walk away from schools. That's when you start seeing huge attendance issues. It's not uncommon, certainly as school social workers, we've seen this, 60, 70, 80, 100 days of absences. You can imagine the gaps in that kid's learning, right? Huge absences. We can't get them in anymore. And we're not bigger at that stage anymore. Often they're bigger than us, and we can't get them in the building. And so they stop coming, and that's where our attendance counselors get involved. And attendance counselors, in my day they were called truant officers, because I'm older, but now they're called attendance counselors, which is nicer. And they get involved, and that's often the first point of referral to a school social worker. First point of referral. And I can tell you, as a school social worker, that's really sad. It's sad, it's because what I can tell you is the window of opportunity to help that student return to some semblance of normal functioning is really small. They are so checked out of school, they want nothing to do with school anymore. The gaps in their learning, can you imagine missing 60, 70, 80 days of curriculum, these are really smart kids. They could do well, but if you're not exposed to all that curriculum that you need in order to prepare you for high school and college and university, like, you're in trouble. So often we can't even get them back in the building. If we can, often it necessitates a medical referral, like a referral to a pediatrician or a child psychiatrist, if we can even get the kid to go. If we can get the kid to go, then the question becomes, will they comply with treatment? Will they? And often the answer is no. And so what kids start doing at this point is they actually start self-medicating. This is really, really common. So drugs and alcohol become a really effective way for these kids to manage their anxiety. So you can see the trajectory for some of these kids. And so the opportunity to get in early, which is so awesome to see you guys here. We've actually never presented in a Catholic school before, even though my kids are in the Catholic system. We've never actually, we've always hosted in Grand Erie schools. But the opportunity to get in early, to begin to learn how to address some of those issues of anxiety in our children cannot be overemphasized. I just want to tell you a little bit about how we started this. And this was, Dr. Templeman and I have worked together since 2008. So I can't believe that. I can't believe I put up with him that long. And so this initiative actually came after a couple of discussions that we had on the phone. And he had this idea. And his idea was if he could actually train teachers to help them learn to manage anxiety in the classroom, and then work with the parents of those students. If we had kind of home and school doing the same thing, we could probably put a pretty big dent into the issue of anxiety. And so we actually piloted this in the fall of 2009 in Simcoe. And so we got together the elementary staff of the 3 elementary schools in Simcoe, and so we did an evening in September for them. And then we followed that with 4 parent workshops at Elgin Ave Public School. So October, November, December, and January. And parents were welcome to come. What was interesting is there was lots of new parents that came each month, but a lot of the same parents came over and over. And that was really fascinating for us to see. Because, well, first of all, I don't know how many times now I've seen Dr. Templeman do this, but I learn something new every time, every single time. But it was also an opportunity for some of those parents to come back and say, okay, I've been doing this, but this part isn't working, or this is working, or what should I do? And Dr. Templeman was there to help them kind of tweak what they were doing. And it was so successful that we actually duplicated what we were doing in our West End schools, West End Grand Erie schools. So we did Delhi, Cortland, Langton, and Port Royal in the following year. And then we actually moved into some Brantford schools and Haldeman schools. And then from there, we just kept getting bigger. So we actually started to include, our Catholic board partners. So probably some of you have already received, some staff anyway, received these invitations before, because I just believe we all work with anxious kids, so let's all come together. And we opened up to other community agencies as well. The thing I want you to know is, as parents, we often feel so powerless, right? But you do play a huge role here in learning to help your children manage their anxiety. None of us has the whole answer, but certainly we can work together and partner to certainly make anxiety or lessen the chance of anxiety getting bigger and more debilitating. In terms of tonight, as Dr. Templeman talks, feel free to ask questions. He doesn't mind that at all. Or feel free to stay afterwards as he's packing up. He has to get back to London, so he won't stick around too long, but if you have questions after, that's fine too. So we have the articles for you, the package, just to draw your attention. Probably read this one first. It's actually in the middle of the package. It's called Why. That's probably the one you want to start with. But what's good about these articles is everything Dr. Templeman talks about tonight is in here. So you don't have to write anything. Just sit and relax and listen, and it's all in here for you. But if you start there, that's always a good place to start. In terms of housekeeping, we have bathrooms where they're really just on the other side of this wall, so just right around the corner. And I think Horazio's just handed out water. And anybody need more articles? Anybody need it? Horazio's handing them out. Okay, I think we're good to go. Just help me welcome Dr. Templeman.
Good evening. If anybody can't hear me at any point in time, just let me know. I've caught a terrible cold from one of my miserable children, so I'm holding them fully accountable for this. Alrighty, now just to add a little bit to what Lisa had talked about earlier in terms of the examples of what anxiety looks like in the younger grades. Because sometimes it's not even quite as obvious as the child that clings to the leg or the child that doesn't want to go somewhere. Sometimes it's more visible as the perfect child, the child that does absolutely anything and everything that everybody ever asks of them, and yet comes to tears and is convinced that they can't do anything, and this isn't good enough and that isn't good enough, and is always on the verge of a breakdown. Or the child that sits in class and doesn't really cause any problems right up until the teacher says, it's time to work. And then they sit there quietly, and then when they're pushed, they suddenly explode and run out of the room and take off down the hall and go hide somewhere, and often get called out for behavioral issues. Yet that never starts until work is required. Or the child that simply doesn't say a thing, either to parents or to teachers or to anyone. Or the child that is always silly and can't help but put themselves out there and needs to make people laugh constantly and never be serious. These are all various presentations of anxiety. Now, to start with, I just want to tell you a little bit about why I decided to do this years and years and years ago. The problem with anxiety is that it is something that requires a long-term commitment to fix. It's something that takes time, energy, and effort, and a lot of repetition over many years, which really means that there's no better person out there equipped to do this than the parents. Now, most of the time, the parents don't have the training, don't know what to do, and relegate getting the kids off to the doctors or the therapists and hoping that they will be able to do it, maybe with repeated visits or whatnot. But most of the time, parents feel helpless because they want to help their kids. They know what it feels like. Anxious kids come from anxious parents. We all know that. So this presentation and what I've tailored today is a way of helping to empower parents to help their children and to understand what's going on in their minds as they go through their developmental cycle and help them see and learn how to manage their anxiety themselves. Now, as we go along, if at any point in time there is something that you don't understand, by all means, put up your hand, yell it out, crumple it up in a ball, throw it at me. I'll do my best to answer whatever questions you happen to have. Always remember, there's no such thing as a stupid question. My university professor seconded that with, no, just stupid people. But no, if there's a question, it means I haven't done my job. It means I haven't explained it fully enough so that everybody can understand it. So if you have a question, by all means, please let me know I'm not doing my job properly, because that's why I'm here, to help people understand. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a quick review of the human brain. And I'm going to explain how the human brain regulates our behavior, how it makes us do the things that we do. And stemming off of that normal human brain, we're then going to take a look at a child with anxiety and how their brain differs from the normal brain. So when you're looking at the normal human brain and trying to understand why do people do the things that they do, the answer is actually quite simple. It really doesn't matter whether you're 2, 22, 92. We all function at the same basic biological level. And the answer to that question for everyone is that really there's only two parts of our brain that make us do the things that we do. On the one side of the brain, you have what's called the harm avoidance drive. And on the other side, you have the pleasure-seeking drive. Now, the best way to think about these two parts of the brain is to think of them kind of like two people. Two little people that are living in your head that are giving you advice, instructions, and telling you what to do based on what happens around you every day. Now, I'm sure most of you came from the era back when you had cartoons, and in those cartoons, you remember seeing that little child looking at the apple pie on grandma's windowsill and out would pop the little angel would go, "Don't touch the pie. Grandma said don't touch the pie." And then the little devil would pop up and say, "Ah, come on, no one's here to see you. Just eat the pie." And then, little Billy would stand there and go, what to do, what to do. It's kind of like that, except that in our brains, whereas in the cartoon, the little angel, the little devil represent right and wrong, the good choice and the bad choice. In our brains, there is no right or wrong. There is no good or bad. Our brains just have one goal, and that is keep us alive. So both of these guys, be it the harm avoidance drive or the pleasure seeking drive, which, by the way, I've given them names and faces, makes it much easier. I call them Jim and Bob. Both of these guys, they play us like a puppet on a string every day of our lives with one goal in common, but different ways of going about it. And that common goal is keep us alive. Now, the way that Bob works, the harm avoidance drive, we're going to cover him first. What Bob does, and the reason that he exists in our brain, is it is his job to monitor our environment. And he does so using the 5 sensory organs. So he uses everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that we smell, everything that we touch, and he uses this information to identify danger. Kind of like a little radar, constantly pinging to check for danger. And when Bob notices something that is dangerous, something that is bad, what Bob does is he jumps into the control mechanism of the body, takes over control of the body, and makes it react in a certain way. And that way is whatever way is necessary to avoid that dangerous thing, to escape that badness. So, to give you a bit of an example of what that looks like in average, everyday people. And it looks like that. Or to put it another way, how many of you here like spiders? Okay, how many people here are scared of spiders? Would actually consider themselves to be mildly, if not seriously, arachnophobic? Well, most of you know someone that is afraid of spiders, snakes, hamsters, gerbils, something. Dogs, cats. Imagine, if you will, that you're sitting there having a conversation with one of your friends, and they happen to be afraid of spiders, and as they're having a conversation with you, a big old hairy spider twirls down on the web, suddenly lands right there. They're going to react kind of like that kid did. They're going to sit there and see it, and suddenly go, "Ah!" And they're going to jump back, and they're going to screech, and they're going to go, and their arms are going to go back, and this whole reaction that they are going to see is going to be instant. Without any thought, without any planning, what happened was the body jumped into action and dove away and took whatever action was necessary to protect itself. Threw its arms up in a shield, put distance between it and the danger, screamed to summon assistance from someone that could possibly help them. All these things are designed to ensure survival. And none of these things were things that they chose to do. At no point in time was there a thought process that said, I think I should do A, B, C, D to get away. They were all instant. So it was not something that they were in control of. Furthermore, it goes beyond just being a quick, instantaneous reflex, because the reality of the situation is that even if they knew, logically speaking, that it's just a spider, it's a daddy long legs, I know it cannot hurt me, they still would not be able to choose to ignore what Bob told them to do, to calmly reach out their hand, pick it up, carry it outside, and let it live. Because the reality is that when Bob tells us to jump, we jump. When Bob tells us to duck, we duck. If Bob tells us to move away, we move away. Even as adults, Bob still regulates and runs us every day. Now, the question then becomes, so how does Bob know what's bad? How does Bob know what's dangerous? Or what we should be afraid of? Well, that's actually a very easy question to answer. Certain things are biologically given to us at birth, and most people are afraid of it. Things like big things, heights, dark, things that really actually do represent danger for us. But the most important way that Bob learns about what is dangerous is through experience. And what that means is that as we go through life, every day, as we experience things, Bob is constantly building up his list of what's dangerous, what's not, by analyzing the world and what's happening to us at the time. So if I'm 3 years old and walking along down the street, and as I'm walking along with Mom, this pit bull comes charging out of the neighbor's yard and attacks me. That hurt. That was not fun. And so what Bob does is he rewinds all the sensory experiences of that moment leading up to that point in time, and he says, okay, this was bad. We do not want to have this happen again. So we are going to make sure that we pay attention to these things. And depending on how well Bob does his job, that could simply mean that from now on I'm going to stay away from my neighbor's pit bull because he's a mean dog. Or it could mean I'm going to stay away from dogs in general. Or it could mean I'm going to stay away from anything with 4 legs. Or it could mean, you know what, I'm not going to go on walks anymore because it was while I was on a walk this happened. Or I'm not going to go with Mom because Mom was here and she let it happen. So the extent to which Bob decides what is bad, it will always be temporally related to the event, but it can be very, very inclusive, or it can be very, very narrow, depending on that child's brain. Now, Bob is a constant evolving organism. He's also very aware of our capabilities, our own body's vulnerabilities, and so he doesn't bother to make us go and do things for no reason. If he knows for a fact that something isn't dangerous because it's never hurt us, well, Bob's not going to make us go and do all sorts of crazy running around and wasting of energy for that reason. But here's the problem with Bob. Bob only knows what Bob has experienced. And if Bob hasn't experienced it being perfectly fine and safe, then we don't really know that it's not. So you can still see very extreme reactions to things that are otherwise perfectly fine and safe, and we know that. And Bob also, he's not a gambler. He doesn't like to play the odds. You know, if it might happen, it's going to happen. So if it's possible, then it's definitely happening, and we need to just not do that, okay? He doesn't bother with probability theory. He's a very simple guy. All right, everybody understand Bob so far? All right. So then we switch over to the second part of the brain, the flip side, the pleasure-seeking drive, this guy called Jim. Now, the reason that Jim exists in our brains is, again, for survival, and he does much the same thing as Bob, constantly monitors the environment, using the 5 senses, looking for stuff that we need to survive. But not dangerous stuff, but the other stuff, you know, the good stuff. Stuff like food, and water, and warmth, and physical contact, and people, and things that we know that we need to survive with. Like the new iPhone 7 that's coming out, and the Apple Watch, and those new high heels, and that latest video game. And, I mean, what teenage girl could possibly survive without a phone? I mean, seriously. Now, I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but not really, because all those of you who have kids that are at that age, you know very well that, no, that's exactly how they see it. And most of you that have gone through it know that, yeah, no, that's exactly how it feels. And the reason for that is that in our brains, there is only one neural network that tells us what we like, and that is this guy, Jim. And the way Jim tells us what we like is through a neurochemical in the brain called dopamine. And if we like something, if something was pleasurable, that releases a little trickle of dopamine in our brain. How much we like it depends essentially on how much dopamine was dumped in our brains. And Jim's job is to constantly monitor dopamine levels. And if dopamine starts to get too low, we need to go find some dopamine out there. We need to go get some food, get some water, get these things that we know we need to survive with. If dopamine levels are high, we're good. We've got all the energy we need, we're good. But he's always on the lookout because we constantly burn energy. We need a refill of food multiple times a day. It's the nature of our human bodies. So when Jim, as he scans the environment, happens to see something that he wants, that he likes, what he does is he locks on to that source of dopamine like a little homing missile, takes over control of our body, and forces us to do whatever it is we have to do to go get that goodie, to go get that thing we want in life. Again, to give you an example of what this looks like in average everyday adults. Jim is the reason why you can't stop at just one chip. One bite of that really good chocolate cake. Jim is the reason why you just need to get the last word in that argument and you need to win. Jim is the reason why people can't quit smoking. Jim is the reason why people get angry. Jim is the reason why people do all sorts of things. It's also the reason why people can work really hard, why people laugh and smile. Now, I don't know if you can hear the sound. So that would be a perfect example of Jim. That's the most common problem associated with Jim that people see is when Jim wants something, nothing is more important than getting that thing, and he will do whatever it takes to get that goodie, bar none. And it doesn't matter who he has to go through, what he has to go around, nothing can come between him and food. Because what happens if you don't eat? You die. So Jim knows that, this really is a matter of life and death. Right here, right now. And if he waits, well, he might not have enough strength to make an argument for it later, so he needs to really go all out right now. Spend all his energy to get what he wants now. Now, the thing about Jim is that he works according to certain rules. And these rules are really, really important to remember and understand. So if you're going to remember one thing, it's remember the rules of what Jim notices. In order for Jim to notice something, rule number one, it has to be something that Jim likes. It has to be something that he has had dopamine with, that he knows releases dopamine, that he likes. Rule number two has to be something that he's going to notice. And Jim only notices, what do I see, hear, taste, smell, touch, feel. So if it's not right in front of me, right here, right now, if I can't see it, if I can't touch it, or hear it, or taste it, then it's not real. So if you're telling me about that thing that's down around the corner, down the hall, I can't see that. That's not real to Jim. You show it to me, that's real. Rule number three, Jim only cares about going and getting stuff. That's his job. His job is to go get stuff. How many of you have ever had hamsters as a pet? How much food do you actually go through that they actually eat compared to how much they store away in their cage? Because anybody who's ever cleaned a hamster cage knows that 3/4 of the stuff on the bottom is the stored away food. And yet if you go and you offer that hamster food, it'll grab it, cram it in its cheeks, stuff it away. Why? So it can go and spit it out in the corner and then come and beg for more, saying, I'm starving. And you could pick up the little piece of pumpkin seed that's right beside it, that it just had. And as soon as you pick it up, it'll look at it and go, I want that. And it'll chase it. Why? Because biologically, hamsters have a gym the same as us. And What we want, we need. But we only want what we don't have. And as far as the brain is concerned, ownership, having something, really depends on only one thing. Whose hands was it in last? Who last controlled this? So if I last controlled this and I went and I stuck this over in my little mat, it's mine. I don't care. I don't need that. I want the one that you have. Anybody here with more than one child will know that that's exactly the way it is. I want that iPad. You have the same iPad. No, I want my sister's iPad. It's the same thing. No, it's not. And it's true, it's not, because that's the one they don't have. Therefore, that's the one they want. Right up until they get it. And then the sister says, fine, I'll take yours. And then as soon as they get it, they're like, no, wait, I want mine. I'm sure you've all seen that happen many, many a time. You know how they've got that saying, the grass is always greener on the other side? And it doesn't matter which side you're on. It's as soon as you're not there, you want it, because that's the way the brain works. So you only want what you don't have, what you can see, what's right in front of you. And the thing about Jim that is important to recognize and understand is he will always get what he wants. At the end of the day, he is just as unstoppable as Bob is, just as uncontrollable. In fact, even more so. Because as opposed to Bob, whose job is to get you out of danger quickly, and thus Bob's trajectory for a reaction is react quickly, powerfully, and then it gradually fades off over time. Because he's, all in, big, lots of energy, but fades. Jim's in it for the long haul. So Jim just keeps going and going and going and going, and he just gets louder and louder and more powerful as time goes on. So it does not matter how long you wait, he will win. He can outwait you any day. And he will. All right, everybody understand Jim? Yeah? All right. So the triangle of control of us as humans in a normal human brain is actually quite simple. It is simply the balance of the volume of Jim and Bob in our brains. And up until about the age of 12, that's it. Just Jim and Bob. Based on right here, right now, what do I see, hear, taste, smell, touch, feel? What is around me? In my brain, is there more danger? Do I see more potential for badness, which is a noradrenaline spike in the brain's neurochemistry? Or is there more goodies? Do I see more pleasurable options, in which case there's going to be a spike of dopamine in the brain's neurochemistry? And that's about it. Very simple equation. But, as most of you who are very keen and good at math will realize, a triangle has 3 points. You see, there is a third player in the game after you hit puberty, not before. And this is really, really important to understand as parents, because for some reason, as adults, we generally assume that kids kind of think like us. We know they don't, but we kind of assume that they do. But the third part of the brain that we have that kids don't have is the thinking part of the brain. The part of the brain that makes the world make sense, that needs the world to make sense, that needs a logical and a reasonable explanation of things and an understanding of stuff that makes sense. Kids don't care if things make sense or not. You see, the question that logic and reason, that third part of the brain, asks is actually the question of why? Because there has to be a reason. It's not okay to simply have a no reason. If there's something that's happening, there has to be a reason why things are happening. Now, for those of you who've asked your kids, why did you do that? 100 times. All right, all at once, what do they answer? I don't know. And I did not plan this. And yet everybody knows that's exactly what kids sit and say, because kids look at you and go, what? I don't understand the question. What do you mean, why? We know why, the reason. What? I don't understand. What are you asking? Why did you hit your sister? Hmm? I've told you 100 times, don't do that. Yeah? So why'd you do that? Hmm? But really, they have no idea what you're talking about. They have no clue what this word means. But they learn very early on that it's a great word to use against you. Because you seem to love to use it against them in asking them a series of questions that have no answer, so they'll do the same to you. So why do I have to go to bed at night? Because it's the rule. But why? Because it's bedtime, you're going to be tired. But why? Because the body gets tired and then needs energy. But why? You're thinking, wow, I got a genius on my hands. No, you just got a kid that's sitting there looking at you going, ha ha, you're going to get to the point where you're going to sit there and say, I don't know. And then I got you. Right back. But kids don't know why. Kids don't care why. Every time you ask them that, you're really just making yourselves frustrated for no reason. There's no point to asking them. But equally, and also important to recognize this, is that all of the explanation to them that you give as to why they should do this, or why this is this way, or why this shouldn't bother them, or why this isn't bad, or good, or whatever it is, it's kind of pointless when it comes down to controlling their behavior. Don't get me wrong, it's not bad information to have, it's just that information doesn't become useful until logic and reason turns on and then starts to use information. But up until then, it's just a bunch of memories, a collection of facts in the head. So what are the rules around what we're going to do when we go to the park? Hands to yourself, don't hit anybody, stay beside you, da-da-da. Good. Hit the park, off they go, tearing off. Not a clue what the rules are anymore. No, they still remember them, but what does that have to do with what they're doing? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So why? Very, very important. Logic and reason, in us as adults, has a very specific function in our lives. It is there to help us override Jim and Bob. To help us say no to some of the stuff that goes on in our heads that our bodies and brains seem to have impulses to do. To be able to make us act in a way that makes sense. It's our expectation of everyone else as adults. We expect other adults to act in a logical way, to be reasonable. You know, it's not a compliment to say, you are the most unreasonable person I've ever met. Nobody says, thank you. No, that's not a good thing. We want you to be reasonable. As a matter of fact, we even have a term for what it means if, as an adult, you are acting in a way that makes no sense. And we all know what it is. I mean, imagine you go to work and your boss runs by wearing a Superman cape and blue underwear and says, I can see through everything, and hey, runs off. Everybody's thinking one thing. Crazy. Because that's our definition of the term. To act in a way that makes no sense, that has no basis in reality. Now, if a kid at school did that, if your 9-year-old came running in a Superman cape, did exactly the same thing, you don't sit there and go, goodness, we need to send him over to a psychiatrist. No, you sit there and go, he's a kid. So we know that. But think about it for a minute. What is it we try to tell kids to do all the time when it comes to their reactions to things? We try to tell them to control themselves.
How they react.
That's right. You need to not do that. You need to change what you do. You need to, yes, I get you get frustrated, but you can't just hit her because you have to have self-control. Self-control is just another word for logic and reason. Same thing with willpower. Kids don't have self-control. They can't exercise self-control because it's a biological impossibility until they hit puberty. And even once they hit puberty, that's just when it starts to develop. It slowly but surely, gradually builds and grows over the years as they mature into adulthood. But it is not at adult form by the time they hit 12. And it is very much about the biological puberty. So don't take 12 as any particular type of set age. It depends on the body's chemistry. If they're a late bloomer and they don't hit puberty till 14, Yep, at 12, 13, they'll be still running around with Jim and Bob as the primary controllers of their behavior and not really thinking about much. And as parents, you sit there and you say, so you're writing a letter to Santa still? And they're like, yeah. Now your 8-year-old does, you don't worry about that. If your husband did, you'd be really worried about that. So if you think about it, we get it. We all understand kids do not think the same way we do. And yet, we seem to, at the same time, forget that as soon as it comes time to try to deal with them. Now, Jim and Bob, as I'm sure you guys all understand, you don't actually have two little people living in your head. That's just the analogy. What you do have, however, the way that we experience Jim and Bob every day of our lives are through two mechanisms. Jim and Bob, first, put thoughts in our head. They put these little messages flashing up on the screen, and presto, we have a thought. And we don't know where that thought came from, and we don't know why we have that thought. And sometimes that thought's an interesting thought. Sometimes it's a thought that makes you go, what? What the heck? Why? What is wrong with me? Why would I even think that? And we suppress it. But kids, on the other hand, they don't know how to filter thoughts, so they will sometimes come to you and say, tell you thoughts. You know, I thought about drowning the puppy, and people get really worried. Like, why would you do that? I don't know. You know, but I was just thinking, what would happen if you went and you killed me? Why would I kill you? I don't know. Or what if the house burned down? Or everybody died? Why would everybody die? Why are you even worrying? I don't know. It's a danger. It's a thought that just popped into their heads. No reason, it's just there. And usually they will tell you about it. Sometimes they become scared of them, and so they themselves won't mention their thoughts because first time they did, there was a reaction from the adults in their world that was not good. And so if the first time something happens and they learn that, hey, guess what, I'm doing something, I'm coming up to Mom, I'm saying, Mom, what would happen if I died? And Mom went, what? Why would you even? No! And suddenly Mom's all excited and agitated. That kid goes, okay, don't ever talk about that again. Don't ever bring up a thought or mention that because we just about killed Mom. That was horrible. So they learn based on their experiences. And it is that learning, that subtle learning, sometimes not even directly to them. They sit and watch their sister say something and have a reaction, and they go, ooh, yeah, that's my sister, and I'm kind of like my sister, I got the same, okay, yeah, no, I'm not doing that, ever. Or they go to school, they see a kid in class that said or did this, and they go, I didn't realize that could get that. I should try doing that next time. So kids are really good at learning, and they pick up on these things. So thoughts are the first manifestation, and then as Jim and Bob jump into the control mechanism of the body and start taking over things, the way that we experience that is we call them feelings. We call them emotions. Every feeling that we experience, every emotion that our bodies go through is simply represented by a different volume of activation of Jim or Bob in the brain. Now sometimes feelings are good. Sometimes they are supposed to be there. They are 100% reasonable to feel this way. But sometimes, and I'm sure everybody here will agree, they don't make any sense at all. Sometimes the feeling is just way out there, and you have no idea why they would feel that way. You know, you hate me. Why? Because you made me eat broccoli. What does that have to do with anything? You're trying to kill me. No, I'm not. But they feel that way, and of course as parents we tell them that, no, you are not abused because you have to go in bed by 10:30 and you can only have a PS4 and an Xbox One and not the latest iPhone tablet as well. When they go, I'm horribly, miserably abused. And we tell kids all the time, your feeling is not valid. I hate my brother. No, you don't. You love him. No, I don't. I'm trying to kill him, Mom. No, he's your brother. You love him. Okay. That's kind of a weird way of love, but whatever. And yet at the same time, on the other hand, sometimes we say things like, trust your feelings. You know, if you have a feeling, trust it. Even if you don't know why, trust that feeling. So kids get a whole slew of mixed messages from us as adults about these things called feelings. And even we, as adults, if we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it ourselves and trying to understand it, we ourselves will have a lot of mixed messages about our own feelings because no one taught us this stuff either. So we don't know this. But feelings can sometimes make sense, but a lot of the time they don't. So how do you know if a feeling is accurate or not? How do you know if a feeling is supposed to be there? If it's reasonable, if it's logical, if it makes sense? Well, you need that third part of the brain, the thinking one, to tell you. So as adults, we can identify if our feelings don't make sense or if our child's feelings don't make sense, and we'll tell them that. How often do we actually, though, sit back and reflect on our own feelings and try and decide, does it make sense for me to be irritated at my child, to be angry at them because Dad forgot my birthday? Well, what does that have to do with a kid? I don't know, but you know what? Guarantee you, they know something's bothering you, and you're treating them a little bit differently, and the reaction is different. Because even as adults, we still struggle every day with controlling our feelings. And yet we expect our children, who have 20, 30, 40, 50 years less experience doing this, to be able to control their emotional reactions better than us. That doesn't make sense. But it is the hope that every parent has to be able to help them do this. Now, it is certainly a doable task. Controlling your feelings, once you've got logic and reason, it's not that hard to do, but it takes time, it takes effort, it takes a lot of learning and training because it's a skill that your brain develops over time with practice. Just like learning to play the piano, just like learning a new language, if you practice it regularly every day, and you keep doing it for years, you can get to be really, really good at it. But if the only time you ever speak French is for that 20 minutes a day, twice a week in class, and never speak it otherwise, you're not going to be fluent when you graduate, no matter what your diploma says, because you've never actually spoken it. You just pretended to. Or if you only practice your instrument a little bit. You'll get better, but still not able to play Beethoven because that's a complicated piece. And controlling emotions is a complicated thing that we do every day. So, this is mini you. That's what I call them. Logic and reason. The thinking part of the brain, the override. And mini you's job is supposed to be to take over control so that people have self-control, so that people have willpower, the ability to control themselves as adults. But kids don't have that, so that gets down to the question of, all right, so then if kids don't have that, what do we do? How do we deal with these situations? Now we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety, because this is really the example we're all here for today. How do you manage anxiety as an emotion if you don't have access to that controlling center that should be able to control anxiety? Before we get to that point, any questions about anything we've covered so far? No? All right. Before we get to that, I want to talk about perception. Does perception matter? The answer to that question is, oh yeah, absolutely perception matters. Now, what is perception? Anybody want to venture a guess as to the definition of perception? Perception is basically what your brain tells you you're seeing, or hearing, or tasting, or smelling, or touching. So perception is an individual thing. You know, it's kind of like an opinion. And everybody's got an opinion on something. And some are valid, some are not. Some are accurate, some are not. But perception is, how do you see the world? Now, everybody comes into life with this very core fundamental belief about perception, and that is, I'm right, you're wrong. I trust me more than I trust you or you or you or you or you. If it's about something that we're actually talking about and I'm looking at and I'm seeing, I trust me, not you. What do you see? How many people here can see the old woman? Oh, come on, it's easy. And with that, some more hands go up, although if I asked them to show it, they'd be like, oh, maybe not. How many people can see the little old grandma? The hideous little hag, the witch with the big stubbly chin. So with a little bit more description, you may be able to see her a little bit better, right? Still can't see her?
I can't even find where to follow.
But there's a grandma. You see the young woman, right?
I think so.
Yeah. The young woman, she's sitting there, kind of chin turned away, aim down, sullen, you know, kind of a pose. You see that one. But you don't see the grandma.
No.
All right. Now, what if I told you, no, it's an old lady, it's a grandma? You gonna believe me? Even though everybody else is going, no, there's a grandma. No, that's where you start to go, maybe if everybody else is, maybe I'm missing something. But if it was just you and I having a conversation and I said, oh, that's an old lady, you'd be like, no, it's not. But pay attention. If you start the picture from the bottom up, this is her stubbly chin. That's her mouth. That's her upper lip. This is her nostril. That's her nose. That's her eye right there. Think of a little wicked witch hovering over a cauldron. Shawl hunched over. Can you see her yet? Still not? You really trust yourself. And I say that because there is a subset of people that when their brains take a look at these types of pictures that could be one thing, could be another, the first thing their brain sees is what their brain decides it is, and it will not shift to the other one because that is what they saw first, and that's what they trust. And for those of you who did eventually see the old woman, if we blanked out the screen and then put it back on and suddenly your brain had to reprocess it, the first image you see is the one you saw first, still, even though you know there's something else. Because our first impression of the world is what we always believe and trust. So what was it? What was it?
I know the answer now. Why? You say money?
Okay, who thought it was a duck? Who thought it was a bunny?
Oh, someone else. Thank you.
Okay, so some of you thought it was a duck, some of you thought it was a bunny. Well, the two of you are going to have a discussion and figure out which one it was and come to an agreement, because you both need to see things the same way.
You just put the two wrong people in that.
Oh, no, I didn't. I put exactly the right two people. So come on, figure it out.
I don't know. She didn't really know. I think it's a bunny.
Oh, she said bunny. Right away she said bunny.
Yeah, I said that.
That's right. So, one of you must be wrong, because obviously, right?
I always write stuff down. There you go.
Right.
My pleasure set.
So which one was it at the end of the day? You want to know? Too bad.
Oh, can we see it one more time?
I'm sorry, since when do we get to rewind life and go back in time and take a look at that look on their face that told me this? Or that tone of voice that they used when they said this, and they said, I wasn't using that tone of voice, and you're like, I heard you. Where's the rewind button to actually see if it was true? There is none. So this is what life is actually like every day. We interpret things in an instant, and we decide we know what happens, and we believe us. And we've been that way right from the time we were about 2. And kids are exactly the same way too. And they'll tell you that. That's not true, Mom. And you'll be like, I told you that, and you said that that never happened. Yes, it did.
Oh, I see money.
All right. How many moving dots are there?
How many what?
Moving dots are there?
Is it a dozen?
I don't know. Count them.
0.
Oh, I see something black.
Anybody have any guesses as to numbers?
No.
Moving dots?
Yeah. Yeah. How many moving dots? Yeah, you can actually be like over there if you want to see it on too much of an angle.
No, I see them.
But it does depend on the angle. Yep. So how many moving dots are there? None. Absolutely none. There are just white dots, gray crosshairs, black circles. So for those of you who saw dots, why did you see dots? Any idea? Because I said there were moving dots. But you know, even if I didn't say there were moving dots, you'd still see moving dots. Now, certainly what I said helped it along, which I did purposely, because if we expect something to happen, our brain is very happy to comply and to give us what we expect. It's the whole basis of magic. And every magician out there exploits that to make us believe that things that they're doing are simply impossible because they're manipulating what the brain expects to see, all the while changing things around. But the reason why some of you see dots, most of you see dots, is exactly the same reason: expectation. Your brain is constantly analyzing the world, trying to make the world come together and make sense and to be normal, to have patterns, because there are always patterns in things. The problem with this picture is, what should be the pattern? Is it the white dots that are the pattern, or is it filling in the dots with the gray so that the lines just become straight and that fills in the pattern? And your brain doesn't really know. So it just kind of juggles them back and forth depending on where you're looking, depending on what the pattern should be, back and forth. You're all aware of the blind spot, right? We as humans have a blind spot about the size of an orange. So at 3 feet, there's literally a spot about that big that we cannot see anything in. How many of you walk around every day and keep running into things or not knowing where things are because they happen to be sitting in your blind spot? Nobody. Matter of fact, how many people could even see it? Nobody. Yet it's there. Oh yeah. Yep. If I got you sitting staring straight ahead at about 2:15 over here, while you're staring straight ahead, there will be a big black circle. Now you won't see the black circle, but if I took a little orange ball that was smaller than an orange and I moved it around, I moved it in the circle, suddenly the orange ball would disappear completely. And you'd be like, what just happened? Because it was there, and it's not. And the reason that it disappears completely and yet you don't see it is our brains are constantly photoshopping the world for us, being very helpful and turning the world into what we expect to see. So it fills in all these blanks for us so that we never notice that there's a whole spot in our visual field that we've never seen. And it does a very, very good job of this. It's an amazing processing unit. But it does this through expectation. So it sees visually what should be there and then it fills it in for you, and away you go. Now sometimes there are problems with our perception. Sometimes these problems are individual, sometimes they're actually biological and genetic. What do you see in that picture? How many people can see the boat? How many people can't see the boat? All right. Next picture. Do you see anything in that picture? Yeah, you. No? All right. You're likely a carrier for the gene for colorblindness. So your father was probably colorblind. Because these are tests for colorblindness. Now women can't be colorblind, it's something that really only affects men, but women can carry the gene because it's an X-linked gene. So if they got the X from an affected father, they can have half of it, which means they're a little bit slower at detecting some of the visual changes. But being colorblind is an interesting thing because when you're colorblind, you have no idea you're colorblind. You see, colorblind people don't see the world in black and white, they see it in color. Just not all the same colors as normal people. Normal human eye sees about 1 million colors, colorblind eye can see about 100. That's a really big difference. But if you went to Walmart, you got a Crayola pack of crayons of 100 colors and you laid them all out, you get pretty much most of the big ones. Matter of fact, most people probably couldn't list 100 colors. Red, white, yellow, blue, green, purple, magenta, cyan, whatever, blush. But where it matters is when you're actually looking at them because the normal human eye can see the various shades and differences. Colorblind person, you give them 10 shades of the same color and they will see one color, no shades. So in the picture with the sailboat is in a color that colorblind people's eyes can't detect. And because the brain, again, fills in the blanks and makes you see what you're supposed to see, it doesn't give you little black dots, it takes your colors and then goes, well, that's probably closest to this, and makes it that color, which in this situation happens to be one of the other colors in that sheet, and so randomly, the dots all become one of the other colors. And the line disappears completely. And no matter how long they stare at that, they will not see it, because they are incapable of seeing what their brain is not going to let them see. And it doesn't matter how much you point it out, they will simply not see it. Most people, when they're colorblind, if they haven't been identified when they're younger, you tell them you're colorblind, they'll sit there and go, you're crazy, I see colors just fine. I had this happen in the office the other day. 47-year-old son's going, you can't see that, Mom? Mom's like, it's a trick question. I'm like, no, it's really not. And she's like, I'm not colorblind, I'm an interior designer.
Wow.
I'm like, okay. And then the comment came, is this why your bedroom is that ugly Pepto-Bismol pink? It's a rosé. But didn't want to accept that might be colorblind. Now what does this have to do with anxiety? Well, it's got everything to do with anxiety. Because when you have anxiety, a part of your brain works a little bit differently than in other people's. And what happens is that the part of your brain, Bob, that notices and identifies bad stuff, it's too good at its job. It does way too good of an analysis of the world, doesn't bother with a quick, simple glance by. It is checking out every detail in exquisite detail with a super zoom magnifying glass to make sure that it does not miss a thing. And what that means is that if it happens to see something little that's bad, well, in someone with anxiety's brain, it's not just a little bad, it's a big, huge bad thing. Because that's what Bob does. That's all Bob knows how to do. Magnify the bad thing and make it seem a lot worse than it really is. And so the reaction that you're seeing of this child, Bob's behavioral response, isn't actually based on what really is happening. It's based entirely on that child's perception of the situation. Their perception that you, unfortunately, don't know and can't see and don't understand. But to them, the only reason they are reacting this way is because to them it is real. It is really this bad. And you can't tell them it's not because they know what they see. They know what they taste. And yet, for those of you who've got picky eaters for kids, who also have a lot of anxiety and those really sensitive taste buds, and you'll sit there and they'll take a piece of something and you'll, like, you have to try it. So they try and they're like, I'm going to throw up. And you're like, oh, drama queen. Until sometimes they even do. And then you get mad at them and they're like, what'd you do that for? Well, their gag reflex told them they were about to be poisoned, could taste the poison. So the only way to save themselves from poison is to vomit. Right now. It's going to protect their lives. And yet you are the one force-feeding them the poison. Why would you do that, Mom? But that's their version of the world. And anytime you see that anxiety, that's all it means, is that their brain is perceiving this very differently than your brain is. Because if your brain was also perceiving it to be bad, well, then you wouldn't have an issue with their reaction. You'd probably be leading them in that reaction. I had one mom come in and going over the list of things that their child does, and like they wash their hands a lot. She goes, no more than me. Like, and how many times a day do you wash your hands? As she, had pulled out her hand sanitizer to put it on her hands for the 5th time in the last 10 minutes. Mom's like, an average amount, like more than 10 times a day. She goes, who only washes their hands 10 times a day? Most people. But she liked to wash her hands every minute, and of course, because that's what she does, she was telling all of her kids as soon as they came in, and if they ever touched a door, to wash their hands, and as soon as they touched the sink, to wash their hands, and if they touched food, to wash their hands, and if they touched people, had to wash their hands. But she didn't see that as being an anxious response. She didn't like the other anxiety-based problems, so that one she never even mentioned. Because it wasn't a problem. It was normal within their lives. But when you've got anxiety, the world is scary. Really, really scary. And unpredictable. And dangerous. And just bad. Because there's always something that Bob can magnify. There's always something that Bob can pick on and go, oh, don't touch that. And even if there isn't, how come my plate's red and they've got blue plates? We ran out of blue plates. Are you sure that's the reason, or is there something else going on here? Well, because it's different. And that's the number one way that Bob identifies dangers. If I don't know, for kids who have loud Bobs, their base assumption is if I don't know what it is bad. So I will not try something that I do not know what it is. Ooh, Mom, what's that? It's dinner. It's casserole. I don't like it. How do you know? Because I don't like it. You haven't even tried it. You have no idea. No, I know. I don't like it. And of course, their very first taste always goes like, because they expect they're not going to like it. So even if you manage to get them to put it in their mouths, their brains are still going to override and make them hate it. So if you're a parent that says you have to try it, 3 bites, not just 1, because they'll still not like everything after 1. It's got to be 3. If you actually want to give them a chance to start to like it, they have to get past that. I didn't die. Okay, no, really, I didn't die. And then, okay, maybe they can now taste the flavor of it. So anxiety tends to come in various flavors. Tends to be, in general, either everything, people, places, things, or it tends to be relatively isolated to people. And people are the scary things. People I don't know. Both are very commonly seen in school. When you've got a social anxiety as the bigger problem, but not everywhere else, it tends to have a better outcome in general because it's like a specific phobia. You can work on that specific problem much faster than you can work on the problem of everything Because even if you fixed everything, well, there's that new thing and that other thing that we've never seen before and that other thing I've never encountered, but all those things are going to be things I'm going to worry about too. I just don't know about them yet, so I don't know that I'm supposed to worry yet. And that's the generalized anxiety disorder kids. Somewhere around grade 6 in the public school curriculum, they go through health teaching. And that's when they teach kids about germs and these little invisible things that make you sick that you can't see, that are all over the place. And every January I get this little cluster of OCD kids that come in and suddenly they're washing everything constantly because they did not know they could die until they went to that class and that teacher told them about this, and now they realize that, oh my gosh, so thank you for saving my life, is what they're thinking. But really, they were fine before this. How many of you have kids that sit there and say, you stop yelling at me, you're always yelling at me, and you're like, I'm not yelling yet. Or you'll just be sitting there, just on the couch doing nothing, and they'll go, are you mad? Like, why do you think I'm mad? You look like you're mad. Oh no, now I've got a puzzled look on my face, which is actually a wrinkled eyebrows and frowny face, and now you're going, no, I'm not mad. Well, actually, that kind of looks mad. If you look in a mirror, it kind of looks mad, so then they don't believe you. But if you want to convince them you're not mad, you got to smile as soon as they ask the question, not look confused. When they say, are you mad? You go, no, of course I'm not. Honey, I'm happy. And then as soon as they see the smile, they're like, oh, okay. Because remember, if I don't know what it is, it's bad. So this neutral, that's not like a smile or a frown or anything, that means you're mad. I know it. This one, you tend to see an awful lot, especially when they start texting. And they text their friends, and then their friends don't get back to them right away. And they're like, they're mad at me. Well, how do you know? They didn't answer me, but I'm pretty sure they read it. I'm thinking, well, maybe they had to go eat dinner. No, they're mad at me. So they start texting. Are you mad at me? Why are you mad at me? That's not fair. I didn't do anything. Fine, be mad at me. I hate you too. And then they get a text back going, what? Question mark, question mark, question mark. You're like, oh, you were in the bathroom. Never mind. Especially when they're teenagers. 13, 14, 15, happens constantly. Especially if it happens to be with a relationship and it's a boyfriend. And they're like, why hasn't he texted me back? He's cheating on me. No, it's texting. But they take no answer as the worst possible answer. How many of you have heard from your kids, I have no friends, everybody hates me? And yet they have friends, and you see them playing with friends, and you tell them about their friends, they're like, well, yeah, but they don't count. Well, why don't they count? Well, what about them and them? Well, yeah, but everybody's always calling me names at school. Everybody? Everybody. Because if one person does it, then everybody. Remember, Bob doesn't go halfways. If it might, then it is. If it's one, then it's all. If it's maybe not this minute, then it's never. There's no such thing as, a little bit of give and take. Bob. Or the problem of, it's impossible, I can't, I tried, it can't. Like, I know you can do this, I've seen you do this. But they just look at it and they can't. Because to them, suddenly it's become impossible. And this, by the way, is why you get the kids that sit there and shut down when it comes time to do work. They look at the work and they're like, are you kidding? How is anybody supposed to be able to do that? What kind of crazy teacher asks me to do that? And they can't. What's the point of trying? Who wants to give that last question a try? Just start to work it out. Nobody? Then you've got the perfectionists, where anything that is not exactly the way it is supposed to be, 100%, is a disaster. Which, when you're printing, and you're learning to print, makes writing really hard if you're not allowed to ever not have something that looks exactly like the practice printing sheet. Because the practice printing sheet comes from a machine. But they want it to look the same, and if it doesn't look the same, then it's not right, so that means it's bad, that means they can't do it, that means it sucked, and they're never writing again. And then they say I can't write or I hate writing or they just don't do it. Or erase over and over and over and over and over. Or everything in the room is just each spot, everything meticulously put away, and sister comes in and, don't touch my stuff! She's gonna ruin everything! No, she's just going in and getting something for her. She's gonna ruin my entire room! Or comes home and one thing is out of place and say, who destroyed my room? And yet, you know, the flip side of that is you tell the kids to go clean their room. They go, they clean their room. You walk in, and sure enough, there's a sock sitting on the floor, and there's a stuffy sitting on their bed that should not be there. And you're like, you call this clean? There's a sock on the floor and a stuffy on their bed. So they go pick it up. It takes literally 3 seconds. Now the room's clean. And they're like, okay. Was it really worth it to point out those 2 tiny little things and those 2 little things that weren't perfect when they did everything else so well? Yet that's what we as adults often do. We point out the one thing that isn't right to them. And we teach them sometimes that actually it's the one thing that isn't right that is the most important thing. So even if you've been great with your brother all vacation long, the fact that you guys got into this huge fight right now after 3 days together, that's what I'm going to pick on. And that's what I'm going to call you out on, and that's what you're going to get punished for. But what about the other 97% of the time, when everything was great, when they had a good time? And kids aren't perfect, neither are we. And we're not going to be, we can't expect them to be. You know, I had a mom in to see me the other day. Complaint was that, you know, for the last couple of weeks, her daughter's been grumpy, has been getting into arguments with her brother, and mom is just, there's something wrong with her. And I said, how do you know? She goes, because up until 3 weeks ago, she was the perfect kid. She never got angry at anybody, never did anything wrong, always ready to help me, right beside me, constantly would do anything I ever asked. And now, I mean, you couldn't stop her from smiling. Now she's sitting there and she's getting upset at her brother. There's something horribly wrong with her. Or she's a little worried about school and a little bit stressed about school. And you're seeing some of that overflow because she's getting of that age where now what people think of me in school does matter. And now she's thinking about herself and comparing herself. And is a little preoccupied and irritated with the little brother who sits there and goes, you're fat, playing right into her insecurities. But that's not what mom saw. Now, a lot of times you also end up with problems like sensory issues that go along with it. You've got to remember, Bob is not just about experience, it's about everything you see, hear, taste, smell, touch, feel. So if there's something bad, it could be bad on your skin, tactile stuff, tags in the backs of shirts. Who wear those anyways? I mean, they just drive everybody crazy, right? Seams in socks, and, or, you know, there's the pants that are just too tight, or hate jeans because it just, yeah, layers, wrinkles, it's just not right. And they can't stand it. And yet you tell them, it's fine. They feel fine, go. But they're like, I can't wear this, I hate this. And yet we tell them, they're perfectly fine. How do we know what they experience? We don't do that to other adults. And we don't go to them and tell them, eat the dinner, it tastes fine. If they say, I don't like it, you go, okay. But our kids aren't allowed to not like what we don't like? That doesn't make sense. Or the kids where everything is too loud. You know, first time into a school auditorium, they start crying, or they don't want to go in, and they resist, or the class gets really loud, really noisy, and they just get frustrated, and more frustrated, and more frustrated, and then maybe snap, or maybe they just leave, or they just can't focus and concentrate, and they're always turning their heads and noticing what everybody else is doing, and the teacher's like, focus on your stuff. And they'd love to, except that that person made noise, and that person made noise, and that person made noise, and that person made noise. And how can anybody focus with such a ruckus around them? And yet it gets called an attention problem, but it's really a sensory issue because they're being distracted by actual real things. It's just that in their minds, the distractions are much bigger than they would be in other areas. Or the kid that, you know, gets scared of the dark? How many people have kids that are scared of the dark and don't want to go upstairs or downstairs in their bedrooms because it's dark? And how long have you been trying to teach them it's fine, there's nothing in the dark? You try and show them, you know, let's see, lights on, nothing there, lights off, still nothing there. Now as soon as you turn the lights off, I couldn't see it. That meant there was something there now. And away they go. But it's always because of these misperceptions. How many of you have kids that are total drama queens? As soon as something gets hurt, it's like they need 100 Band-Aids, or their leg just about fell off. And they're telling you it really, 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 really hurts. And you're like, can't even see the mark. It does not hurt that much. But to them, it really, really, really hurts. Now the problem with these kids is that, let me get this thing to work. When they mature and they become teenagers, along with all the problems that Lisa mentioned, there's a bigger issue at hand that is problematic for these kids in the developmental trajectory. And that is that when you become a teenager, the single most important thing that you need to do for the rest of your life is develop a sense of self-esteem, develop a sense of identity, to be able to tell and know, who are you? What is your value to the world? What can you do? Where will you fit in society in comparison to everybody else? And the problem is that if Bob is the predominant guy sitting at that control panel, all Bob can see is what's wrong with this picture. Because that's all he's capable of doing. How do you know when Bob's at the control seat? Well, that's easy. Just look at them or listen to them. You'll be able to tell, are they thinking happy thoughts? Are they laughing? Are they looking forward to stuff? Or are they worrying and have frowny faces and concerned and are feeling upset and bothered and so on? How many times have you tried to tell them it's not that bad? You've got 100 things that are going for you. You've got this and this and this, and you're trying to tell them all these wonderful things, and yet it doesn't seem to make any difference to them when they're in those states of mind. How long could you tell the guy who's colorblind to take a look at the boat? They can't see it because biologically their brains are incapable of seeing it. When Bob is in the driver's seat, there is no good. Jim sees good, not Bob. Bob only sees bad. And if Bob is the one that's processing their world, it doesn't matter the good that you tell them. They will not hear it, they will not remember it, they will not pay attention to it. And you could even use examples that are supposed to be, see, you didn't remember how last time you got a silver medal? See, I never win anything. It's like, no, that was supposed to show you that you did really well. But they took it the wrong way. Because it's all Bob can do. So if you've got a child that has a really loud Bob that a lot of the time is processing all this negativity about them, how do you get them to get to the point where they can develop any sort of self-esteem? Well, it's actually not that hard, but the key variable is you can't talk to them about the things that they do well when they're upset. You need to do it the rest of the time. They need to hear that message from you and from the other people around them, not when they're feeling bad about themselves, because that's the worst time to send that message, because that's when it's not listened to at all. You need to tell them how amazing they are when they just had a good day and everything's fine, and they hear from you. You know what, I was just thinking, you're the most amazing kid I've ever had. Thanks, Mom. What did you want from me? But that's the time you want to feed them all this positive stuff. And they need to hear it, because the only people in the world that they might trust more than they'll trust what they see about the world is Mom and Dad. You are the only people that are potentially more important to them in their perception of the world than their own view of the world. You could tell them, that's black. And they might believe you because you said so. No one else. But as parents, you have an incredible amount of power with children. And you can tell them all sorts of stuff, and they will believe you if they can hear what you're saying. And they can't hear it when Bob's in the driver's seat. All right. So, how do you deal with Bob? How do you fix things with Bob? Anybody have any questions about Bob-related behaviors and that stuff in general before we move on? No? Okay. So, how do you deal with Bob? 2 simple ways of dealing with Bob as a parent. Rule number 1, if you've got a kid with generalized anxiety, or you've got a kid that has anxiety in a specific area, the single best way to deal with Bob is to not mess with him in the first place. Don't activate Bob if you don't need to. Don't tell them about all these horrible things that are happening around the world and to you if you don't need to. Don't let them hear about your financial troubles. Don't tell them you were going into the hospital, but it's just for a small procedure and I should be fine. It's just a little surgery. Bob, your surgery, mom's going to be dead. And they freak out. That's it. Now, even if it was just an hour, you went in, you came out, as soon as they hear about it, you may as well be dying. So protect them from too much information. For kids with generalized anxiety, I tell parents, in general, filter what comes into your home carefully. No newspapers, no news, no Weather Channel. What do these things tell you about other than the bad stuff that happens to people just like you and me every day? There's nothing uplifting in these things, and you certainly don't need to know about it to protect yourselves, but it certainly does make your day a lot more miserable and unhappy as soon as you find out about all the horrible stuff that happened around the world yesterday and last night and today. Shows like CSI, Criminal Minds, all these things that are all about horrible violent crimes that happen to everybody every day. Or horror movies that the older kids want to watch. Or scary things. Or practical jokes from older siblings that want to laugh at terrorizing their siblings with their fears. These are things that, as parents, you should work your hardest to prevent. Now, the reality is, no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to raise them in a bubble. If they go to school, they hear from people about stuff and so on. So it's not like they're not going to be exposed to stuff. You will have enough activation of Bob on its own. It just means you're not making the job worse on yourselves by adding to it. I had this one little girl, she was 11 years old. She'd come to see me because her parents were concerned she had an eating disorder. She stopped eating a lot and kind of narrowed herself down, and everybody was thinking, this is a body image issue. She's going into puberty. She doesn't want that. She's trying to restrict and so on. Talked to her and I said, what's going on? And she's like, I just don't want to eat. I'm like, aren't you hungry? She goes, I'm starving. I'm like, well, why can't you eat? She goes, just promise me you won't tell my parents stuff. I'm like, don't worry, I won't. She goes, because they'll be really embarrassed. I'm like, okay, why? She goes, we can't afford food. And her parents are like, what? Because I told them, I think it's important for me to mention this to them. Because there are ways of, addressing this and so on. And I said, how do you know you guys can't afford food? She goes, because they told me that. I said, what happened? She goes, we were driving and we were going to be going off to the restaurant and we passed this one restaurant and my brother said, I want to eat there. And my mom said that we couldn't afford to eat there. And I knew that meant that we couldn't afford to really eat food and that I had to do my part to help the family not have to spend money. So she started restricting her food to save the family money because they couldn't afford to eat in her mind. But she never bothered to mention this because she didn't want to embarrass her parents, so she never asked them, Mom, Dad, can we afford food? Because they don't know what makes sense. They can't reason that out in their own minds. In their minds, this is what they heard, this is what they make of it. So for kids with anxiety, whenever you see a sudden change in behavior, an activation of something, you know they got some information or an experience that triggered this. It didn't just come out of nowhere. Whether it's they saw a movie at a friend's house or someone at school mentioned this to them. Had one kid suddenly get all upset at his parents. Why? Because someone at school said, you know what, you're adopted. And he's like, I'm adopted? He had no idea. He had no idea he was adopted. Started getting angry at parents, started not trusting them. And then parents, would get upset at him and like, you're not even my real parents. And they're like totally confused by this because he wasn't adopted. It was just some kid at school trying to harass him and saying, yeah, you're adopted. But they heard it and they worried about it. And that's the problem. Even when it doesn't make sense, Bob doesn't know that. Bob hears it. Bob goes, oh my gosh, what if it is? What if it's true? And goes to the worst possible outcome. So try to limit access to these things. And remember, these kids who have generalized anxiety, they usually have incredible hearing. They can hear that show you think you're watching quietly downstairs. And they can hear the screams of the cries. And sometimes that's even worse when they're upstairs trying not to listen and they hear the ah! And they're like, oh my gosh. And you wonder why they come running out in the middle of your movie and go, I can't sleep. Well, yeah, for a good reason. Management strategy number 2, let's go to the point where now Bob is activated about something. And Bob is freaking out. Let's use the simple strategy. Bob does not want to go back to bed because Bob is terrified of the dark. So how do we get them back into bed? What's the typical strategy here?
Right.
I mean, we all remember what happened to us when we wouldn't go back to bed, right? Right. Our generation was raised a little bit differently. Our generation, you didn't go back to bed when your dad told you to. It was going to hurt, and you knew it. And our parents, you know, they like to say, well, you know, you respected us. No, we were terrified of you. Call it respect if you want, but really, we were terrified of you. You hurt a lot. Yes, I was scared of the monster in my room, but I was more scared of you than the monster that was going to eat me. That's the only reason I went back up there. But the reality is, it takes a drive to fight a drive. It's the only thing that does. And in the old days, if Bob was the cause of negative behavior, well, you needed a bigger thing for them to be afraid of, to be the bigger fear to control that other behavior, because Bob's going to avoid the biggest danger in the room. That may be a lion, that may be a dinosaur. Saber-toothed tiger, all right, I'm going to cozy up to the lion. And pray I don't die too quickly. But you know what? As soon as the saber-toothed tiger and the dinosaur leave, I'm still not going near that lion. Because I'm still not afraid of it. Matter of fact, I'm even a little bit more afraid of it, because every time I was near it, I was even more terrified because of you guys. Or this bigger fear. So Bob would fight Bob. But we try not to do that nowadays. We try not to beat our kids into submission. We try not to, threaten them to death. Besides which, even when we try that strategy, well, they all know better than that now. They'll sit there and go, oh yeah? What you gonna do? And you sit there and you go, back in my day, there was an answer to that. And like, yeah, our teacher said you're not allowed to. But it's true. And a lot of parents get stuck on this. How do you make them do something? How do you force them? Because we were all forced, and we think we didn't turn out badly, did we? Oh, I don't know, maybe. Maybe not. But sometimes we want to force them. Because they have to do it. They have to go to school. Do you threaten them if they don't go into class when they're crying and saying, don't, I'm terrified? Well, you feel horrible when you do. And for most parents who have anxiety, to them, they end up in just as many tears as the kid does. Because they left their child in tears. And what if the child is right? What if they are being hurt or abused in that classroom? And what if the teacher really is being mean and bullying them, and they really do have no friends, and they do get hurt? And then their anxieties run away with them. It takes a drive to fight a drive, but you don't need to use Jim to fight, or Bob to fight Bob. You can use Jim to fight Bob. And as a matter of fact, it is the single most effective strategy out there to use Jim to fight Bob. Now, the way that works is actually very simple. If you remember the rules of how to activate Jim, then you know exactly what to do to get a child to do anything that they are afraid of doing. All you got to do is activate Jim, get Jim's attention, and say to Jim, hey Jim, you do this, you'll get this. And Jim will be like, okay. And that thing that they need to do, that's the very thing that Bob was telling them not to do. Because when Jim wants what Jim wants, it does not matter how big or loud Bob is, Jim is going to win. There's only one thing that makes a difference at the end of the day, and that is time. Might not win right away, might take a few minutes, but Jim will always win. Because as time goes on, Jim just gets louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, Whereas Bob starts out loud, but always fades off down the road. The longest it will ever take you to get a child to do anything that they are absolutely flat out refusing to ever do is going to be about 45 minutes, give or take 15 minutes. It depends on each child. It depends on how quickly their brain metabolizes the neurochemicals in the brain. Because essentially it's when does noradrenaline dip lower than dopamine. As soon as dopamine is higher than noradrenaline, now Jim jumps in the control panel and Jim says, all right, we're going to go do. And they will sit there and they will go, all right, I'll do it. And they will volunteer and they will gladly go and do the very thing that they were never, ever, ever going to do without you having to push them at all. And the best part of it is that when they do it and then they get that goodie, Jim learns just as much as Bob learns. And Jim learns again based on the same rules. If I just got something I like, a bunch of dopamine, I need to do more of that because that was good. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make you do more of that whether you like it or not. This is how people end up stuck on cigarettes. You know, smokers. Anybody here smoke? Anybody remember their first cigarette? No? Don't remember how wonderful it tasted? Yeah. Yeah, everybody remembers that because it's hard to do. No matter what you want. And even when you know all the reasons why and all the bad stuff that can happen and the negatives. For some reason, it just doesn't seem to matter. And when Jim wants it, all those reasons could go out the window. And you will go and you will do it. Because that's exactly what happens in reality. Let me give you an example. This happened 3 or 4 months ago. I had a little kid come into my office. He was 12. Had to go in for grade 7 vaccinations. Needle phobia, which I'm sure some of you understand. And he was not going to get a needle. Matter of fact, they said, well, you can't go to school if you don't get a needle. It was like, fine. I mean, sweeten the pot, why don't you? But, you know, the nurse is like, oh, come on, man up, and she walked towards him with the needle in the nurse's office. So he bolted, you know, pushing the nurse aside as he ran out the building and started to run off home. So the principal called it assaulting the nurse and assaulting the staff. I called it a silly nurse. It should have realized you got a terrified kid here who's going to bolt and you're not going to be able to get them that way. But he came into my office because Mom took him to the GP who couldn't get anywhere near him with a needle, and no matter how much Emla cream and, you know, Ativan and whatever else they could give the kid ahead of time, no way, no how. He was not doing it. So he came into my office and I said, you know why you're here? He goes, to talk to you about something. I said, yeah, you know what? He goes, no. I said, needles. He goes, no. He said, you don't like needles? He goes, I am never getting another needle in my life. I don't care what anybody, I am never getting another needle in my life. I remember the last needle. When I was 2, I remember the doctor impaling me with that needle for vaccinations. Impaling. I loved his choice of language. But in his mind, that's what happened. And he's like, never again. I said, you sure about that? He goes, yep. I said, because here's the thing. I have a needle right here. And I pulled out in my office drawer a nice shiny needle. Because I was doing this on purpose. His reaction was this. He went, Mom, leave it right now. We are leaving. Mom, you promised this was a talking doctor, not a needle doctor. And Mom's sitting there in the chair going, what are you doing? I did say you were a talking doctor, not a needle doctor. So I sat there and went, whoa, Billy, calm down. I put the needle down on a chair beside me. And I said to him, Billy, I promise I will not touch that needle again until you beg me to pick it up and give you a needle. And from across the room on the couch, he's sitting there going, that's never going to happen. I said, oh, no, it'll happen, Billy. It'll happen in about, I'm guessing maybe 5-10 minutes. Now he kind of pulls his hands down. He's like, why? What are you going to do? I said, I'm not going to do anything bad to you, Billy. You could walk out of this office at the end of the appointment without ever getting a needle, and you will leave the office exactly the same as you came in, I promise. You will have full control. No one will touch that needle until you tell me you want it. And you're going to be happy about it. Because you're crazy. Mom, I thought I was supposed to be the key. The doctor's a crazy one. I said, you know why you're going to do that, Billy? He goes, I'm not going to do that. I said, oh, you will, but you know why? He said, I'm not going to do that. He said, because, Billy, if you do, I'll give you this. Right here, right now. And I put it right behind the needle. And Billy sat there on the couch and he went, but I don't like needles. I said, then don't get a needle. He goes, but needles hurt. I said, yeah, but you don't have to. You can leave without getting a needle. But what if you don't give me the money? I said, Billy, I made a promise. I'm a doctor. Of course I'm going to give you the money. He's like, why did you just say that? You don't want to know why? Of course I'm going to give it to you, Billy. He's like, oh, this is going to be so bad. I'm like, gonna be? Are you actually thinking of doing this, Billy? He's like, no, maybe, I don't know. I hate this. Oh. You're the stupidest doctor I've ever met in my life. You're the stupidest doctor. I hate you. And he jumps up and he walks over to me and he goes, just do it. Just give me the needle right now. I'm like, it's only been 5 minutes, Billy. You sure? He's like, no. I'm like, well then sit down. He goes, just give me the needle. I'm like, you look like you're going to be unhappy about it. He goes, I don't want to get a needle. I said, then don't get a needle. Sit down. I would rather you left this office happy, liking me, than left this office angry at me that I gave you a needle. I do not want to make you unhappy, Billy. Just sit down. Think about it. You can always make the decision. We can still have half an hour. You can make the decision anytime. So he goes and he sits back down, and now he's sitting down on the couch and he's looking at me like this, going, yeah, look over at him, and, Billy, you look like you're upset. He was a little. What are you mad about? He goes, you didn't give me the needle. Like, did you just hear what you said, Billy? What? I said, you just said that you're mad at me because I didn't give you a needle. 6 minutes ago, you were ready to kill me if I tried to give you a needle. What happened? I was like, I don't care. Please, Dr. Templeman, please, I like you. I'll be happy with you. You're going to be my favorite doctor in the world. Please, can I have the needle? Like, are you sure? He's like, yes, I promise. I'm like, all right. Got up, held out his arm, got the needle, no problem. Got the $50 in hand, nothing but smiles. Looked over at Mom and said, Mom, we're going to Best Buy after this. So he obviously had something in mind that he was going to spend money on. So to him, it was going to turn into a very real thing very quickly. Saw him again 2 weeks later. First words out of his mouth as he walked in the door, he's like, hey, Dr. T, can we do the needle thing again? And I said to him, sure, no problem. But second needle isn't 50, it's only 25. He's like, that's okay. Got another needle practice. And Mom's sitting there going, okay, fine, it's fair enough, I get it. But here's the problem, I can't afford $50 every time he needs to get a needle. I'm thinking, Mom, you took how many days off work? You paid $180 for the vaccine at the doctor's office. Really? You sure about that? But I didn't even need to do that because Billy did it for me. Billy turned to Mom and goes, Mom, I'll give you the family discount. He goes, I'll only charge you 20. And Mom looks at him and she goes, 5. He's like, Mom, you're such a cheapskate. Come on, 10. She's like, 5. And I'll throw in a can of pop. It's like, fine. And that was that. He went off to the doctor's office, got himself a needle for $5. Why? Because I taught him, by virtue of this, that getting needles wasn't bad. Needles was actually good. I guaranteed a nice rush of dopamine into his brain the first time it happened. And then again, which made it predictable. So now that we've got repetition, we've got predictability. So getting a needle went out of Bob's list of bad stuff to avoid and went into Jim's list of good stuff to go look for and get more of. And any particular thing can't be in both lists. It can only be in one. So if you want to get it out of Bob's list, put it into Jim's list. Don't just bother with the boring, really long-term strategy of slowly but gradually teaching them it's not as bad as they think it is by repeated repetition over time of it's not as bad as you think it is, so that they slowly, gradually kind of get better at it, which is the typical strategy that most people use. Face your fear. Face your fear. Face your fear. Just go do it, which always takes a really long time and a lot of repetition. Eventually it works. There's no question that it works. But it takes a long time, and sometimes you don't have that kind of time when you're a parent. And you got a problem that needs to be fixed right now. And how do you deal with it right now? Well, this will get you there every time. If you use those strategies, it doesn't matter whether it's the first day of school, getting to school, getting up in the morning, putting things away, touching stuff, doing dishes, chores that they don't want to do, or even handing in not perfect work. And I had to pay a girl $10 to hand in a project with scribble marks on it, because she would not hand it in any other way. I told her, your teacher doesn't care. You get 90s across the board. Your teacher doesn't care if you happen to have a little scribble there. You don't have to go and rewrite the whole thing. But she wouldn't do it. So I said, tell you what, you give to mom to give to your teacher, I'll give you $10 right now. And she's like, you want me to get a bad grade? I'm like, no, I'm going to give you $10 to give it to mom to hand in to the teacher. Whatever grade you get is going to be whatever grade you get, but I want you to see that you don't have to be such a perfectionist to still get your grades. That it doesn't need to be that perfect, and it will still get the grade that you want. But you don't believe that, and nobody can seem to teach you that or tell you that. So you need to learn that by experiencing it, and the only way to get you to experience it is to convince you to try it. And I'm tipping the odds in my favor anyways, because I'm actually adding a reward for her trying to do this, to hand in stuff that isn't perfect. She still got a 95 on it. And I knew that. So obviously you want to use, make sure that if you're telling them to do something that they're scared of doing, that they're afraid of a bad outcome, make sure you know it's not going to be the bad outcome that they're expecting. Because then it just, becomes a disaster. It's like, don't worry, it won't hurt. But if it really does, for real, then what you do is you tell them, look, it might hurt. But if you do it, I'll give you this. But don't tell them it's not going to hurt. Just tell them, yeah. I told Billy, yeah, it'll hurt. It's a needle. Actually, what I told him was, it's not going to hurt anywhere near as much as you think. As a matter of fact, I don't think you're even going to feel it. And it's true, he didn't. I gave him the needle. He was still complaining about how much he didn't want to get the needle and was worried about it by the time I was done. And I told him he wouldn't feel it. And he's like, I'm going to feel it. And I'm like, I know you're not going to feel it. So how do you know? Because I already gave it to you. Like, I felt that. It hurt. Like, no, it didn't. And the reason it doesn't hurt is when Jim's in the driver's seat, Jim doesn't care about bad. Jim's focused on good. So even if it was a negative sensory experience, who cares? It was good. So they can actually get hurt and not feel it anywhere near as much because it's fun. Yeah?
Sorry, I wanted to jump in a couple minutes ago, but I think you were going to go where I was going to ask. I think we're dealing directly with anxiety when you're talking about Jim and Bob, right? Because to appeal to Jim over Bob is to say to a child, for me to get you to do something, I'm essentially have to bribe you, right?
Oh, no, not bribe.
That's what I was thinking at first, right?
Right.
With someone with anxiety. But you're essentially providing exposure, right?
Yes.
By shifting it to Jim and having it become then a positive experience, and then maybe at that point they can have a conversation like, I'm not going to give you $50 every time I want you to do something, but I was trying to show you that meals didn't hurt.
Yes, so
As they
the
get
key
older,
for that
you know what I mean?
exposure, yes, absolutely. The key for the exposure is you want to teach them it's not bad.
Yes.
The only way to teach is to either get it encoded in a Jim or Bob's repertoire. So to teach them, yes, you could do it the other way, which is just not as bad as you thought it was. Repeat. Not as bad as you thought it was. Repeat. Which will take a long time to go down that hill of how bad is it to get to be not as bad as they thought. But it still never becomes something good. Never becomes something that they choose to do or that they want to do. If you want it to be something that they choose to do, that they have no fear about, no hesitation, you want to make it something that's good. And the only way to make something good is to have dopamine tied to it. So unless you actually had a syringe that you could actually inject dopamine directly into their brains while they did it, which is essentially what cigarettes do through chemical reaction in the brain, they force a flush of dopamine, which is why they're so addictive. But if you could do that, that'd be one way, but you could do it artificially by just having a reward that triggers the release of dopamine in the brain as soon as they achieve the thing. And the timing of the reward, of achieving the reward, getting it in their hands is very, very, very important. Because learning occurs based on temporal connectivity to the situation. So if I want him to learn that doing this is good, I want that goodie to be in his hands as soon as he finishes doing the task the way it's supposed to be done. And if not as soon as, then as close as I can possibly humanly get it to that point in time. If I can't do it right away because I need to wait for them to get home from school, as soon as they get home from school and I know it got done, that's your reward. Not on Friday at the end of the week not later on tonight in the middle of the day. I want it to be something tangible, immediate, in your hands, because that's the moment of reward, is when it got into their hands. When they control it, that's the flood of dopamine. So for certain rewards, what you do is you use this. Does anybody know what this is good for? I mean, in and of itself, how much fun is a piece of paper, a rectangular piece of paper? Not a heck of a lot. I mean, I suppose I could make a paper plane out of it and fly it around, but otherwise, it's not really all that much fun. The thing is, I know that this can be exchanged for something that is fun, for like food, or an activity, or a toy, or a game. So this, because of its guaranteed exchange, becomes as good as the thing you wanted to buy over at Best Buy. So the moment of reward didn't need to wait until Best Buy. It actually was as soon as he finished it, because that's when it was in his hands. So if you're using an activity as a reward, or an event, or something that they like, I've had parents use anything from a chess game with dad, because the kid really wants to play with dad, and dad works and dad never has time, so you know, a 10-minute chess game with dad was the ultimate reward that he could think of. How did they turn that into it? You get a plastic poker chip. And if he does it, mom gives him the plastic poker chip. He knows when dad gets home, if he gives dad the plastic poker chip, dad drops whatever he's doing and goes over to the chessboard and gets to play those 10 minutes. Presto. So now the moment of reward is as soon as he gets that plastic poker chip. Even though it's not something that he can see, the poker chip is something he can see. So that becomes the thing that fulfills all those criteria needed to activate Jim. Now, when you mention, bribe, I just want to clarify that terminology a little bit, because
Say bribe?
yeah, he said, you have to bribe them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not bribery. Bribery is when you pay someone to do something that's wrong, when you pay someone to break a rule. When you pay someone for doing something that's hard to do, that they don't want to do, but they're willing to do because you asked them to do it, that's called a job. And then when we get paid for doing a job, it's called a paycheck. We don't call it a bribe. Because for this, we're asking them to do something that they do not want to do, but they're going to be willing to do it if we make it worth their while to do it. That's a paycheck to doing hard work. So don't think of it as a bribe, think of it as a paycheck. And pay attention to the fact that in the home, for most parents have been giving away their kids' paychecks for years for free without any return of service. Why do that when you've got so many good paychecks at home right now that you can use if you just made them contingent on certain things? I mean, sure, on one level it's kind of contingent, because if they get really bad, then we take it away. But that'd be kind of like, as an adult, your boss paying you for the year's salary on January 1st and saying, okay, now I hope you show up for work. You're paying me ahead of time? Okay, I'll take it. I'm not going to complain about it, but good luck on getting me to work all the time. And then what happens if the boss shows up because you didn't show up and says, I want my money back? Now you're all angry at them because they want my money? Well, it's not yours yet if you didn't earn it. Well, yeah, it is. You gave it to me. So then it is theirs, because as soon as they control it, they think of it as theirs. So actually, for kids with anxiety, raising them in an environment where they have a lot of unrestricted access to good things, to fun things, to things that they can do whenever they want, is bad for them, because it means that they don't ever end up wanting anything, because it's already theirs. Having those things available as options, contingent available rewards, is absolutely a good idea, because then they're thinking about what do they want instead of thinking about all the bad stuff with simple things. Yeah.
Sorry,
You go ahead.
I want just an extension of this, because I grew up not knowing I was experiencing anxiety. Growing up as a kid, thought I was happy, thought I was just full of energy, thought I was all those things, and I was those things, confident, all those wonderful things. But then life serves you a few curveballs, these sorts of things. So I can speak from experience, and listening to you, I'm in a bit of shock, because I've always wanted to use the reward theory, not that you would call it that, but if it can take a kid out of a feeling of impending doom, and that's how I would describe how I feel, and I would say to a person, why are you happy and why are you not? It comes down to one thing, a simple feeling. What is that feeling? By listening to you, it's dopamine.
Jim and
right?
Bob.
And so appeal to Jim, you can later in life realize that everything doesn't come with a gift and a price tag. They're gonna figure that out. But for the kid to go to bed every night sick to their stomach, scared and not know why, I don't want that.
That's right. My son has a lot of anxieties, generalized anxiety. You know, I've been dealing with this on a personal level for years. And my daughter, she's, 4 years older than him, very intelligent. She's also got some anxiety, nowhere near as bad as his was. But his big reward has always been video games. It's always been, whether it's the PlayStation or the PS or the DS or whatever. So in my home, electronics have always been very tightly regulated, and there was no such thing as go and sit down and watch something or play something for free. You had to earn it with something every day. Now that something was something relatively simple, like if you go to school, you get, that earns you the first hour of TV or video games. If you do your dishes, that earns you the next half hour. If you do your homework, that earns you the next half hour. So that essentially, if he does what he's supposed to do this today, he still gets to spend his free time enjoying himself on these things, but if he doesn't do it first, it isn't happening, so he knows this. So he knows that he needs to do it and has to do it to get what he wants, and so he's always thinking about it because it's never a given. And my daughter, after watching this for several years, turned to me and she goes, do you realize that about the only thing he asks you every day is how much time have I got on the computer? And I said, yeah. I said, that was the plan. She's like, doesn't that bother you? That that's all he thinks about? I said, you know what, honey? No, it doesn't. Do you know why? Because he's not talking to me about what if I die? What if he dies? What if his dog dies? What if he has no friends? What if he can't find any work? What if, and all those what ifs that used to consume him every night. Now he's just thinking about games and looking forward to playing games and has a smile on his face, because up until he develops that thinking part of the brain and can start to reason out and learn to identify these thoughts make no sense, these thoughts aren't logical, I don't need to pay attention to them, and learns to control them, I can either leave him with Jim in charge or Bob in charge of his brain. And Bob is miserable. Nobody likes having Bob sitting there telling you about what misery you're going to experience in your life every single day for no reason. Why not focus on something that you want and like and look forward to? It's a far better way to grow up, and then once he becomes a teenager, yeah, absolutely. I'm letting you learn how to control your stuff yourself a lot more, and I start stripping away the controls because you need to learn to manage this on your own. But as a kid, up until puberty, there's no chance that he can manage this on his own. I'm the only one who can do it for him as his parent. And it makes a big difference because the thing about the brain, and this should be encouraging to most parents, is that it learns. It learns through practice. Whatever it is we do in our lives, if we do a lot of it as a kid, we get better at it, no matter what. And how do we know that we're doing it? That's easy. The part of our brain that lights up, that makes this happen, gets turned on and gets activated, and so that pathway gets worn, and so it becomes like a route, a control route that gets used a lot. So, here's the problem. If Bob is in the driver's seat of the brain, and the neural circuitry associated with Bob is activated 90% of the day, and you leave that on for the next decade, they've just gotten a lot better at worrying, and it just gradually gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. It does not gradually get better as they get older. It gradually gets worse. And for those of you who have kids, you will see that. You will see that things that they used to be able to do a couple of years ago, now suddenly they're afraid to do them. And you're like, but this was fine. Why? And they can't explain it to you. They just know that it's bad and bad and bad because they're learning, they're practicing worrying constantly. So if you can get them focused even for an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day, there's only 24 hours in a day, and put Jim in the driver's seat, that's 25% less practice that Bob gets, 25% more practice, and so you start to change that balance with the kids that have 90% Bob, 10% Jim, to start to gradually over the years become more normalized in the hopes that by the time they hit puberty, Bob isn't such a big deal anymore, and they've actually got some ability to use Jim to some effectiveness to deal with Bob. Because even as adults, it's still the single best strategy for for overcoming Bob is to use Jim. Make sense? Any questions about anything that we've covered? Yeah.
I have a question with regards to transitioning. So exactly what you're saying, it's stuff I've always wanted to do with the follow through. Because you're tired, you're like, oh, and you just kind of give in, and you're like, okay, fine, one more hour, another half hour, because you're busy doing dishes or you're making lunches or whatever you're doing. So I want to do what you've said, like for lack of better words, it's the reward program, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
That's exactly that.
absolutely.
It's a
You
reward-based
plan,
behavior
you
modification
do
program.
this, after you do this, then you get this, you do this. So, but for those of us who maybe have given in too much, how do we now go like full treatment?
You need to plan first. And the key to the planning is you need to think of the rewards that you've got available in your home environment, and you need to think, okay, what can I control realistically, effectively, without a lot of effort? And control means not permission, unless you got one of those perfect kids that if you say no, then they will never touch it because, they would not dare, go against God, in which case usually you don't have that problem already. But control means if you were not here today, if you disappeared off the face of the earth, that activity, toy, game, system, whatever, would never be able to turn on again. So that means you put passcodes on any electronic. You have the password and only you have it. You don't need to be there to turn it off if you have timer programs that are installed in that automatically set it back to, splash screen or the type or passcode stage after X number of minutes. And they've got programs like that for every system out there. I can aim you to them if you're wondering about which ones they are. TVs, you can put locks and controls on them. You can use control systems on just electronics, anything that plugs in. You can get a control box that, again, with a key, you turn the key, you can set the amount of time, you take the key out, time counts down, when it hits 0, turns the power off to whatever's plugged into it, and without that key, there's nothing they can do to turn the power back onto that device. So there's all sorts of very creative ways of ensuring that you're in control of the reward. But the transition, the way you want to make the transition is you want to do it one day where you don't approach it like, all right, you know what, nothing's there anymore. Usually the best time to do it is around a time when they seem to want a little bit more independence. And you tell them, and you approach it this way, you're like, you know what do you think about me treating you more like an adult? And most kids go, yeah, like, all right. So here's the way the adult world works. The adult world, as opposed to the kid world, you don't get anything given to you for free, but you get to pretty much work for whatever you want, and the harder you work, the more you get. So if you want to work hard to get stuff, and it's a guarantee as an adult, why not? You're like, okay, so what does that mean? It means that if you do some work, then you get the goodies. But if you don't, then you don't. But you know what? Once you get the goodies, they're yours, and no one can take them away. You can't ground you from it. If you've earned it, it's yours to use. So you tell them, so here are the rules. These are the things I want you to do. Clean your room. You keep your room clean, that'll earn you the first half hour of whatever, or the first activity. You treat people in the house with respect. So you're nice to people. If these are good kids, and most kids with anxiety tend to be, in general, pretty well-behaved kids. They don't tend to be the really big behavioral issues. So in general, it's not hard for them to do this stuff. They're already doing it. And they'll tell you, but I already do that every day. And you're like, I know. Now I'm just going to reward you for it. And they'll be like, but I do it every day. I know, and isn't that great that you get paid for it every day? Well, but why make it like that? Why can't I just have it the old way? Because this is what it means to be an adult. Yes, you go to work every day, and yeah, you know you're going to get a paycheck because you went to work. But you also know that you don't get the paycheck if you don't go to work. Well, but that doesn't make sense. Of course it does. But what they don't realize is they're going to start thinking about the paycheck a lot more, and what do they need to do to get that paycheck without even realizing, because the paycheck stopped being for free. But you make out the list of what they need to do. If you have more than one kid in the home, you just implement it across the board for all kids. It's great regardless whether you have anxiety or no behavioral issues at all. And it's a great system because the best behaved kids, they get the most rewards, as opposed to the kids that usually have the most behavioral issues getting most of the attention, and the ones that are doing well being left by the wayside because they're not causing problems, and then parents feel bad, because I'm always spending time on the bad behaved kid, and the good one sits there and never gets any attention. Well, this way everybody knows who's doing well. And the competition that could sometimes happen between kids now becomes about who gets most minutes. So now the competition is, haha, I was better behaved than you were. And you're driving the competition in the right direction. They're both trying to outdo each other to be good.
So what about if, right now, it's probably one of mine, so she's being extremely ignorant with language and whatever, right? So right now, I wasn't using that strategy, I'd seen it years ago and I tried and failed. I tried my hardest. But anyways, so I took her electronics away, I hide them, right?
Shouldn't hide them, you should leave them in plain sight, just with a different passcode.
I love that, because if I had their passwords, she gave it back, she changes it. Because they have to tell me their password, but I never thought of it just being my password.
FYI, to everybody in here, if your kids are under the age of 16, nothing belongs to them, it all belongs to you as parents. Kids have no right to property prior to the age of 16. Doesn't matter if it was a gift from Santa, doesn't matter if they bought it with their own money, it all belongs to parents. If it's yours, and that means it's not their password, it's you that puts in the password because it's your phone. And if you put in the password, great. If you don't want there to be a password, there's no password. And if they put in a password, that's fine. I know how to hard reset it, so anytime anybody puts in a password that doesn't let me access my phone, I have no problem in going in and pushing that little button and resetting and wiping everything from it because it's my phone.
I didn't actually do that. I didn't think you need to.
Oh yeah, of course you can factory reset it. You know, you can totally factory reset these things. They just need to know that you're actually going to do it.
But you know what she says? It doesn't matter, it still counts. When I said it, there's still, all my accounts are still there.
Yeah. So,
She has been working on it. But now, so I've taken it away right now, but what do you do when she's just like, wakes up ignorant, comes home from school ignorant till night? I just don't count any points or time, right?
yep. I guarantee you she's spending her time doing something.
Yeah.
Kids can't stand being bored.
Gone. Oh, I see.
And if you're doing it properly, they're going to be bored if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing because there will be nothing else to do. Remember, for Jim, it's all about the dopamine. Jim doesn't care where he gets his dopamine as long as he gets dopamine. So, sure, phone is dopamine, but if I can watch TV and my favorite show for free, well, that's dopamine, so that's for free, so I don't care. Or if I can go and hang out at my friend's house and do something over there and that's fun, I'll do that, and that's fine, I don't care. So as long as they're getting their dopamine, Jim isn't being activated in the right direction because Jim still has something he can do that's going to get him dopamine that isn't what you want them to do, so why not?
But if you're going to do it, then you're probably going to take back all those things.
Yes, all the things that they want, that they like, that they spend their time doing, need to be under your control. Unless you've got the one single most important thing and they don't want to substitute for anything else, you know, most of the time they've got multiple options, so you need to have everything be under your control so that if they're not listening, they're bored.
And you add up the feeling.
And yeah, if they earn it, you tell them, absolutely. And you can tell them, look, you can start using it as soon as you have half an hour, I got no problem. And once you get a half hour, great. Yep.
Sorry, question on that one. So like you add up their time and they get that time and say after, say they want an hour or whatever, they get it for an hour and then they become belligerent when the hour's up. Do they now lose time the next day?
No, they don't lose time. What you do is this. You sit there and you explain to them that this thing, you know, whether it's, my phone's right there. You have the phone and you tell them, look, this is something that you told me you wanted to use as a reward. So I have no problem in using this to help you focus on better behavior. If this, however, is going to be a problem and is going to make you misbehave, then you know what? That was my bad. I take full responsibility for that. I shouldn't have done it. I will fix it. And I did this with my son. He was 12. He really wanted Minecraft for the computer. So I went and got him the Minecraft disc. He started playing it, you know, was really into it. And this one day, it was dinner time, and his mom calls up and says, dinner time. He's like, in a second. 2 minutes comes by. Dinner time, in a second. Another 5 minutes goes by, and she's like, I said dinner time, and he calls out and goes, and I said in a second. And my son doesn't do that. And certainly never anywhere where I'm ever in earshot, I can guarantee you that. So I walked up there, and I walked up to him, and he sees me walk in, and I just went down. I said, I'm sorry about that. He just looked at me and went, what? Reached down, pulled out the disc, said, that was my bad. I shouldn't have done that. He went, what? I'm like, This turned you into an obnoxious teenager. Before this, you would never have dreamed of talking to your mom like that. This turned you into that. So, and I'm the one who bought it, and I brought it into this house. I feel so bad that I made you into this. I'm sorry. Took the disc, snapped it in half, threw it in the garbage, walked out. His only response was, what? What? No, it was my fault. I'm like, no, it was my fault. I made you this by bringing it in. This is my fault for bringing it in. I shouldn't have done that. But no, I was misbehaving. I'm like, no, it's not your fault. I mean, I know this isn't you because you don't normally do this. You only started doing this as soon as that came along. I know you're not a bad kid. So clearly, something that I did, brought in here, caused the problem. I can fix that, no problem. And it's not your fault because I know that kids get sucked into things. And they do, this is a fact. There's a thing called behavioral momentum, whereby after a certain period of time in an activity, the brain starts to have a really tough time disengaging from that activity without it becoming a big problem. And it's based on the dopamine flow and the stream of dopamine. And once they hit that point, yeah, you're going to get negative behaviors if you try to pull it away from them. So if this is something that is that addictive, don't have it in the house. If they cannot prove that they are mature enough to handle it and to responsibly stop it, then it's a bad idea and they're just too immature to use it, and that's my fault, and don't worry, I will fix that, I promise. And now it's up to them to decide if they can end it or not. And if you want to find out the behavioral momentum before getting to that point, the way that you practice doing that, practice disengaging from an activity, is you get the iPad, the phone, or whatever, and you're like, all right, this is the way it is going to be because, and you can explain behavioral momentum to them and tell them, I don't know where your point is, but I know that after an hour, definitely it's a problem. So let's figure out where it is. Here's a phone. I want you to play your game on it, do whatever it is you're going to do on it for 1 minute. As soon as that beeps, I'm going to be sitting right here. I want you to take it, close it, hand it to me. You do that, we're going to wait 30 seconds. You now get it for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, set it, beeps, comes back to me, wait 30 seconds, now we'll do it for 10. Every time you hand it back to me, we wait 30 seconds, you get it for another 5 minutes on top of the last mark, and you go up, and you go up, and you go up, and you will hit a point where, for example, at 25 minutes, they did no problem. But now when you hit 30 minutes, they're not turning it off right away. They're kind of hesitating, waiting, and they're like, and it's harder. And they don't want to, and they start to say, this is stupid. When up until this point in time, they're like, okay, cool. And that tells you right there, 25 minutes is okay, 30 minutes is not. So in terms of behavioral momentum, don't ever give a reward period that is longer than 25 minutes without a minute of stopping in order to let that go down so they don't get stuck in that momentum. Because if they do it at 25 minutes, wait 5 minutes, and then another 25 minutes, they could still play for 45 minutes in an hour and not have that same reaction compared to if you let them play for 45 minutes and then try to stop it. And if they want to get longer, you tell them, all right, well, we can practice going up a little bit slower and see if you can handle it. So if you want to be able to try to do 30 minutes, so you can get into bigger chunks, because they're like, but a show lasts 40 minutes, so it doesn't make sense just to pause after 25 minutes on TV. Well, then you need to mature. And you need to practice. If you want to practice, I'm happy to make you practice. But obviously you don't like getting angry. You don't like being upset. This is what's making you upset. This is the brain. It's not your fault. So you're not blaming them. You're just explaining it's the chemistry, so it's the way it is. But if you can't control the ending of the reward, then don't use it as a reward. That's one of the rules about rewards. If you can't ensure that it's going to come back to you when it's done, then it's not a good reward, and then when it does eventually run out of battery, because it will, that tells you you need to wait a little while till they get more mature.
How do you translate this to testing? My daughter was very anxious when she has to do it.
Yes.
Fine up until that point, she can do the work. But when she sees that test right in front of her, she just...
And do you know whether she's worrying about the grade, or just the fact that there's that pressure of having to write the test?
I think it's just the pressure to go right in the test. That's wrong.
And is it because the test gets graded? Because usually it's something about, someone's going to be purposely saying yay or nay, or there's going to be marks or something.
Maybe, but it's not. And someone said to her when she was in grade 1 that she was horrible at math, and she's carried that with her.
So she's believed that she's horrible at math.
Exactly.
So in order to get her to like math, what you do is simple. You know what, honey, I know math tests are tougher for you, so every time you have a math test, I'll pay you $5. Well, what about French tests? Oh, French tests are easy for you, so you only get 2 for those. Like, does that include math quizzes? Sure. And you know what? If you get over an 80, I'll toss in another 5. Okay. And?
It still bothers me. Like, she's just got it in her head she can't do it, and no matter what I say or what I give her, she just can't overcome that fact that she's no good at it. And she'll sit there and tell you, I can't do this because I'm no good at math.
So what you need for her to do, first off, is you need for her to stop telling herself that she's no good at math. And you need to make it about trying, because usually if they don't believe they're any good and they can't, they won't even bother to try.
That's her good.
So what you do is first reward, and usually it's with younger kids at this point, and I don't use, dollars, I use simply M&Ms. I tell parents, go get a thing of M&Ms, make sure chocolate or sweets from now on are strictly regulated, and there's no such thing as free sweets, and suddenly you'll have a very valuable bowl of stuff, because they will crave that like you wouldn't believe. You put it in front of them at homework time, and you tell them, here's the deal, these math questions. If you write an answer, I don't care whether it's right, wrong, or otherwise, you get 1. If it's the right answer, you get 2. And if you do it within 30 seconds, you get 3. So no matter what, you absolutely will get chocolate. The only way you don't get chocolate is if you don't try. So you could write orange, you'll still get 1. Because you wrote something on that paper. And I don't care whether it was right or wrong. She gets 1 just for putting pen to paper, and she'll test you on that. Usually, depends on how old they are, but they often test you on that. And sometimes they'll do the whole page like that, and you sit there and say, oh, that's fine. Because you know what? There's still that bowl, and you had it counted out so that there could potentially be 3 for each question. And they only got 1/3 of that bowl, and the rest of the bowl is just sitting there. And because they didn't try hard to get the right answer, they're going to really wish they had. And it's the next time that they'll start to try harder, when they realize that there's still lots left over that they could have and they want more, but there's no more questions to do because they just, goofed off with the first 10 questions and that's all there was. But doing that will get her to learn to try, and at the same time also reinforce trying to get it right. And if you want her to get faster at it, if that's ever an issue around speed, you set it at a first time that you know she can usually do a simple question in, and then you move the time back as they get better and better, and as they get more confident, if speed's an issue, because that's usually something else that goes along with anxiety. Yeah.
If there really is a problem with math, though, then you have to do a different strategy, because low self-esteem can really develop from that.
The thing about having real difficulty with math is the following. If they have a learning disability, an actual learning disability in math, what that means is not that they can't learn math, it means it's harder for them to learn math than it is for other kids. So for them doing this same job, it's tougher than for their brother who doesn't have a math learning disability. So you reward it accordingly if that's the case. So they get 2 for trying, just because I want you to try, only 1 if it gets right, and no one cares about how fast you go. So you tailor it to that, but you always want to reward the trying and recognize that if it's tough for them, they need more motivation to try, because they really don't see the benefits of actually learning, which in and of itself is a reward for most kids to be able to learn it and get better at it. It feels good to be able to do that. Whereas for them, if it always stays tough, then it's a bit of a challenge. Yep.
For younger kids, when they're still learning self-control and whatnot, they're out of parents' care, so at school, and you try dangling and reward in the morning, and they still sort of learn into that. It's a long period of time. How do you sustain through that day to keep them on track?
If they've got problems in the classroom setting, what you want to do is you want to try to partner up with the teacher or whoever's going to actually be able to see them in somewhat of regular intervals. And you let the teacher know. Usually the behaviors are something the teachers are the ones who bring to your attention as a problem, so usually they will be noticing whether it's happening or not. And that's where you can use those plastic poker chips as the reward tokens. You give them to the teacher. You tell the teacher if he's got a good morning from here to first recess, he gets one of these ones. And at the end of the day, he can, have 4 of them if there's 4 chunks of time, and these get to be exchanged for rewards at home. If the teacher's willing to do that, then you've got a perfect system where they are gauging the behavior, they are rewarding it, and that's still the benefit, and then he gets to spend it when he gets home to see you at the end of the day based on whatever he's got in his hands at that time. So that's the best way to transition in that setting. If you can't do it quite that way, then you still want to have as visible and a visual reward as they're going. So heading into the school, you want to have that thing right there so they're thinking about it. And you can take a picture of that thing. So if it's an iPod or a game or Mario or whatever, get a picture of Mario, stick it right on their binder so that every time they open their binder, they open their agenda, there's a picture of Mario staring right back at them. Or they get the lunchbox, there's their Pokemon lunchbox to remind them of Pokemon that is a reward for when you get home. So you find ways to build in visuals to remind them what they like while they're in school, where you know they're going to access these things on a regular basis.
What about the parent that doesn't know if their child has anxiety, or whether you're just trying to teach them the right road? And the example I can give is my one son was iron deficient, and it's really hard on his teeth. So you would say, you're going to get cavities if you don't brush your teeth. You got to get that brown medicine off your teeth, right? You don't want to go to the negative, but I'm telling him the truth, right? I'm telling him the truth. But if you don't know the child has anxiety, and they do have anxiety, you might be perpetuating Bob.
Yeah, and
right?
you'll find
Might
out
be
pretty
living in a
quickly.
fearland instead of a
But
reward
you'll find
land.
out pretty quickly whether or not that activates Bob, because Bob will start talking about that.
Right.
And Bob will start bringing up, are my teeth going to fall out? Is this going to happen? What else happens if I'm deficient? Is
Yeah.
something else going to happen?
Yeah.
And Bob will run with it, and you'll hear about it if it's Bob.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, if he needs to brush his teeth, it's not about telling him because you don't want to get cavities. It's, look, buddy, every time you brush your teeth, you get a bedtime story. Don't you like the bedtime story? Isn't that worth brushing your teeth for? I mean, I got no other reason than that, other than I like telling you bedtime stories, but I can't unless you brush your teeth.
Because I have two sons. Like, one son will say to me, it could be the best reward in the world, and like for him, because we eat mostly organic, is burger and fries for me, and that'll be the once a month thing. And he is so stubborn and so set in his ways that you could say burger and fries, and he would say, I don't want burger and fries. And I'm like,
You could
You got
say,
me.
you could
I
say
got
burger
nothing
and
now.
fries.
Yeah, yeah.
But you
when
could-
I'm desperate, right? You know.
Well, no, the thing is, you're saying it.
Yes.
He's not seeing the burger and fries, smelling the burger and
True,
fries right in
true,
front of him,
yeah.
so Jim isn't getting activated just because you
Okay.
said it. Words don't activate Jim and Bob.
Okay.
It's what do they experience, so they need to see that reward.
Okay.
And know that that's there, because trust me, I've had so many kids sit there and say, I don't care what you have, I'm not doing it. I sit there and go, really? So I'm not telling you, I'm going to give you, I'm showing you right here. And they're like, take that away, just get rid of it. And I'm like, why? If you're not going to go for it, then what does it matter if it's there? But they don't want to look at it, because the more they look at it, the more they know they're going to crack. So you want them to stare at it. And if you're wondering if you got a good reward, all you have to do is sit there and pull it out. You know, I've got a box of Smarties, and kids go, I don't care if you give me Smarties. I'm like, really? And I pull out the Smarties, and I just move them over here. If their eyes track it, oh yeah, they want it. So just watch their eyes. You know, just hold something up, have the kid go, yeah, you got a reward they like, right there. Yeah.
Okay, so I know we're talking about managing anxiety in children, but how as an adult do I find my gym? Like, no one's offering me $50.
No, you're
Have
supposed to
I
have that
learned-
willpower.
So am I like too far gone?
No, gym is still there for you, but it can't be something that you necessarily have unless you've got the self-control to not give it to yourself unless you do what you need to do. And usually if you don't have that self-control in the first place, then you usually don't have the self-control to say no to yourself either. If you don't, then you get a friend or you get a spouse or you give it to someone else and you tell them, all right, here, this is my shoe money. I'm giving it to you, don't give it back to me until I do this. And then if you know they'll actually follow through, then you'll be sitting there going, well, wait. But if I, because then you don't want to give it because you know they will, but if you actually want to go through with it, that's what you need to do. You need to take something and hand it to someone else, so then it becomes something that is important.
Your husband or Mrs.
What's that?
Your husband or Mrs.
Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned before about the child that can't concentrate and darts around with problems and noise. And you said it, a teacher can say it's like attention deficit.
Yeah.
You said it's like more of a sensory.
It's a distractibility. And where this gets differentiated from ADHD in these kids, because the thing about anxiety, and it's most commonly misidentified in the classroom setting as ADHD rather than anxiety, because what happens when you get really anxious? Anybody here has been anxious? You get restless, right? you start to fidget, you start to pace, you start to twirl with stuff. That looks like hyperactivity. And if you're worrying about stuff, so let's say it's not just the distractibility, but you're actually just worrying about stuff. You know, how good are you going to be at your job if your child's in the hospital and about to die? Sorry, you know what? Yes, I'm at work here, but my brain is somewhere else because whatever you're talking about, boss, is not as important as my kid's life. Well, to these kids, everything is as important as that. So to them, they may be thinking about what happens at lunchtime if this happens, or what, you know, what if this kid bullies me and beats me up, and yeah, the teacher may be talking, I may be sitting staring, but yeah, I didn't hear a word. And even if the teacher says, hello, I'm like, sorry, what? They were too busy worrying, so they were paying attention just to the wrong thing, to the internal stimuli, as opposed to what the teacher was talking about. If it's also the distractibility, then you'll notice that in noisy settings, in noisy situations where stuff is going on around them, they will be very easily jumping around to things, or a lot of social anxiety, if they just hear someone whispering, even if they can't hear it, they're on, are they talking about me? Am I the subject of that conversation or whatnot? So they really want to kind of try and pay attention and hear what's going on and so on. The kid that likes to be the center of attention in a positive way has learned that the best way to make people like you, to get positive feedback, which is laughter, that's a universally positive thing, is to do something. So they do something once and accidentally people laugh, so they go, hey, I need to do more of this, and then they do more of it, and then they do more of it. And then what you'll notice is that then when people go turn negative, now they really amp it up even more. And you're like, that's enough already, and the more negative you get, the more they go up even more, because this is their way of getting people to like them, and if you're not liking them, they need to try harder, and this is all they know how to do. So it's kind of like the opposite effect of the kid that goes, right, sorry, you know, got out of control, but the more you tell them, the worse it gets, and it's because the anxiety drives that. But one of the defining characteristics that you'll see the difference between ADHD and anxiety, there's a couple of different little key factors. Number one, kids with anxiety are very observant. They don't miss a thing. They know where everything is. They can identify the tiniest detail anywhere. They know exactly what you said, when you said it, who said what, when, where, and how. Kids with ADHD are not observant. They miss half of the world going on around them. They don't know what anybody said because they can't remember what anybody said because they weren't paying attention to what happened yesterday or even what was on their desk, 10 minutes ago. So they don't know what's happening and so on. So they've got really horrible minds for memory, for knowing what's going on, for details. Whereas kids with anxiety, they are very good with details. They know all the stuff. They've got too much stuff going on that they're paying attention to. And the second thing is that kids with ADHD, you'll see it across the board, everywhere. It doesn't matter whether they're at home, whether they're at school, whether they're having fun, whether it's their favorite activity in the world or their least favorite activity in the world. They just can't pay attention. So they will sit there and they'll play their Lego, and it's their favorite Lego kit, but next thing you know, they're out, doing something in the kitchen, and they forgot about their Lego, and then they're off watching a show, and then they're like, oh wait, my Lego, who's got my, and now they forgot about their Lego, and then you get back to the Lego, but then they forgot that. I had an ADHD kid, as a classic example, he wrote himself a little sticky note saying, don't forget to watch Stimpy. Stimpy was his favorite YouTuber that he desperately wanted to watch every day, but some days he forgot that he liked Stimpy and he forgot to watch it, and he'd get upset that he forgot to watch it because, it's his favorite thing, yet he still couldn't remember that he was supposed to watch it. So he made himself a little sticky note to remind himself to do his favorite thing in the world. Kids with anxiety, the problems with the attention are when there's anxiety. If they are happy, if they are relaxed, if they're in an area, then they really don't look like they have ADHD, and because all the other symptoms that come up with the elevation of anxiety aren't there. And the higher the anxiety, the more they look like ADHD, but it is in a very specific setting and situation, which is when that anxiety is around, be it in social situations or at school or whatnot. Yeah.
I noticed that there's a lot of teachers here, but I just wonder, when you do these programs, do you do a program for the teachers also? Because I think that is hand in hand.
Yeah, we've done that. Not necessarily with this board, but I've done PA days where I'm talking to teachers and so on. Initially, that was the whole goal of that thing, was to get the teachers as a big part of that puzzle. Right, Lisa?
So I was talking. So
Yeah.
and
She wondered if I don't do some of this for teachers, because there should be more teachers here.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, I didn't say there should be more, I just noticed there wasn't any, so I was wondering if maybe you one with the teacher?
No, no, I'm.
Not specific. We
We
used
did
to
it
try
for
to.
Grand Erie,
Yeah.
right, because I'm connected to Grand Erie, but, the county board, I have no idea.
Yeah. So it's not a mandatory thing. This is just,
But
yeah.
I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah, we're done. So if anybody needs to leave, by all means.
Yeah,
Feel free to
and then
run.
some people already had to, because
Yeah.
they have babysitters and stuff.
Yeah.
Is transition a real thing, or is that just something that, for like
Change.
my sons, yeah, is that just something that kids with anxiety have a tougher time with, than kids that just are gym all the time and they can't wait to what's around the next corner
Yeah.
because they don't have anxiety?
That's right.
So transition really isn't an issue, it's just a product of a kid who has anxiety?
That's right. So the fact is that difficulty with transition is one of the signs of a child with anxiety.
That's right.
You know,
Okay.
when they have trouble adapting to change, that's a sign that leads to Bob, not Jim. Jim doesn't have problems adapting to change. If it's fun, and doesn't care whether it's fun here, fun there. It'll change any which
So
way.
it's not normal to worry about school. It's not normal to worry if there's gonna be a thunderstorm tomorrow. It's
No.
not, that's all Bob,
Yeah.
right? That's it.
Exactly.
So to dismiss it as transition is really just masking, the child might get to a point where they're getting along okay, because they're used to the day-to-day activity of whoever that transition was, but it
Yep.
doesn't mean the anxiety went away.
No, it just means that they got used to that sequence of events. But if that sequence of events changes, if you get a substitute teacher in and
Right.
now they put math instead of science, then suddenly it's like, wait a minute, but science is supposed to come after. We can't know, and there'll be all sorts of questions to go, but this is the way it's supposed to be, and but you guys said it was going to be, but
Yeah.
why? And then they get called oppositional because they keep challenging the teacher as to doing this, and then because they don't. No, you can't change it on them. They were expecting one thing.
Yeah.
Don't go messing with it because that makes their whole day unpredictable now, and if it's unpredictable, it's going to be bad. And that's why they don't like it, because transition means unpredictable. All right.
Any last questions?
Any last questions? Feel free to come on up. Otherwise, thanks for coming.
Wow, you were great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Templeman, on behalf of our school community, thank you for coming this evening. The first thing is first, and you're allowed to witness this. I'm going to sit down. I hate needles, but I know he's got that $50 bill, right? Hold up my
I don't
sleeve.
have the needle.
Oh, well, you know, can we improvise? No, seriously, I think what we're
I used to
trying
bring
to
a
do...
tarantula.
Well,
I actually used to
I
bring
was
a
going
live
to
tarantula.
reference that
I'm not
because...
kidding. I've got the picture of my daughter with the tarantula.
The point we're trying to do, the culture we're trying to foster is that we can't do it alone as schools, and parents can't do it alone, and we can't work in silos, and so that ability to work together makes that spider a spider and not a tarantula. So where's my $50? No, I'm kidding. Thank you all for coming. We hope that this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end, and I'm willing to sign up for part 2. Thanks and have a good night.